not going to work. You got to put it underneath. Over here. Okay, can you get it done in 45 minutes?
45 minutes?
Yeah.
You can't start the work earlier.
Yeah. ID. Cheryl, could you ask your colleagues to help usher people in? Let them know that dessert is in the room. And let's get some forks too, Cheryl. That would be great. Okay, great. All right, we're gonna begin. We'll begin this afternoon's program. Got a lot of things to cover this afternoon. I would remind everyone that forks have been brought in, so you can make your way to the back of the room and gain one of those. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our Legislative Affairs team, led by Kyle Christensen, our Director of Government Affairs, our Deputy Director of Government Affairs, Sarah Diedrich Kasdorf, and I like to say the effervescent and energy-filled Dan Barr as well, our Legislative Associate. I would also say this, and I have a chance from time to time to tell our legislative team this directly, but it's important, I think, when they're told this in front of the membership. I am so incredibly proud of the work they do, the professionalism with which they do it, their access to the Capitol, how they are received, how they conduct their affairs, and how they represent all of you in county government. It is something we should all be proud of. They're very, yes, I agree. They deserve a round of applause. So at this time for the legislative update, let me turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Kyle Christensen.
Good afternoon. Today we're going to provide you with a legislative update. We'll talk briefly at the very beginning, kind of from 30,000 feet, where the legislature is, some of the big ticket items that they've either accomplished in 2016 or hope to accomplish over the next few weeks. Then we'll dive down into specific pieces of legislation. Of course, the bills that we have listed both in your packets and in the PowerPoint are not reflective of all the bills that we're working on. So if you have any questions about the bills that we do touch on or bills that we don't, we'd be happy to answer those questions. So as we've talked a lot about already this morning, the end is near. The legislative session is quickly approaching a conclusion. And in Madison right now, you really have kind of two groups of people or two groups of associations when they're told the legislative session only has a few weeks left. You have one group that says, keep calm, the end is near. These are the folks that have bills that they really don't want to see passed over the next few weeks. They're saying, if I can just run out the clock on this, then the bill will go away and I don't have to worry about it potentially ever again, or at least not until next January. So you have a subset of the Madison Lobbying Corps in this group. Then you have the other group who says, panic now, the end is near. These are groups who have a number of legislative priorities they still want to get done. They may have had a bill that was drafted 9-10 months ago that slowed through the process and they're hoping to push it to the finish line. or you have groups that introduce bills even today still and are really hoping that they can get it on the floor calendar in the next week or so. From the counties association perspective, we're somewhat in the middle here. If the legislature were to close down shop and go home tomorrow, we'd be okay on a number of bills. But as we'll talk about, there's also a few remaining priorities that we have that we really want to get done before the legislature adjourns for the next 8 or 9 months. So again, as was mentioned earlier in the legislative roundtable, the legislative calendar does not officially end until the first week of April. But the legislature will not be in session that long. The State Assembly plans to meet February 9th, February 16th, and February 18th, and they plan to go home. Now that could ultimately change, but at this point it appears that the lower house will be out of here by the middle of February, and again, don't plan to return until the new legislature is sworn in next January. The Senate has said, look, the Assembly can leave in February if they want. We're going to come in at least one day in March. So right now they've told members to keep the date of March 15th open, where it's expected if that's the final day, they would concur on bills the Assembly's already passed. Now it's important to remember that if the Assembly leaves on February 18th, they send bills over to the Senate. If the Senate were to amend that bill somehow, the bill essentially would die because the Assembly is unlikely to come back in and concur. So whatever the Assembly leaves the Senate with on February 18th will either be passed into law because it will be concurred by the Senate, or it will not. Again, we expect all legislative action will be completed by mid-March. The governor will review bills that hit his desk, of course, either sign or veto them, and then it will be a full sprint to the November elections for the legislature, where, of course, we have every member of the State Assembly up for another 2-year term and half of the state Senate. A few session statistics. So far, as of the end of January, we have 837 Assembly bills introduced, a little short of 700 Senate bills. Only 127 bills so far have been enacted into law. So as you can see, a lot of bills get introduced that never get enacted. Now over the next few weeks, because we expect the Senate and Assembly calendars to be pretty packed with bills, these numbers will raise pretty significantly. But again, a lot of the bills that are introduced never go anywhere. Just this morning when we were checking our phones, at least 7 or 8 bills were just introduced today. In all likelihood, in order to get that through the committee process and scheduled for the few remaining floor periods left, it'd be a very, very difficult task. So what are the Republican priorities for 2016? Of course, Republicans hold a significant majority in the State Assembly, where they have 63 seats, and the State Senate, where they have 19. In 2016, some of the major things they've done over the last month and a half. Civil service reform, government accountability reform, the Niagara and heroin legislation. This is a follow-up to the last session's heroin package, or what's known as the HOPE legislative package. There's been a renewed focus in the legislature, for whatever reason, on property rights. As many of you are aware, in the 2015-17 budget, Wisconsin Act 55, there were significant changes to county authority as it relates to shoreland zoning. That was the first kind of property rights issue that gained momentum in the legislature. That's been followed with subsequent legislation from Representative Jarko and Senator Lassay that again focus on property rights, notification of zoning decisions, vested rights. Right now, it's difficult to know whether those bills will move forward in the legislative process or not. However, the governor and legislative leaders have indicated that it is a priority, if at all possible, to get some of those property rights bills done in the next month. Then, of course, there's a package of bills, what we call the child welfare bills, that were drafted by Senator Coles in conjunction with the Wisconsin Attorney General. Sarah will touch on some of those bills. They were a package of 4 bills, 3 of which will likely pass. Some have already passed, and then one that we have significant concerns with that at this point does not appear that it will move forward this legislative session. Then we have a few issues that have received a lot of attention both in Madison and around the state that will likely not be acted on in 2016. One of them is the repeal of minimum markup. Following the elimination of right to work and the repeal of prevailing wage, there were a group of legislators in the state capitol that made minimum markup kind of their next target. So this is a state law that requires retailers to sell goods and services at a cost higher than what they purchased them for. The most common example is gasoline. So Quick Trip, for example, cannot sell gasoline at the price that it purchased it for. If Quick Trip decided we don't want to make any margin on this, by law they have to increase the price of that. So there is a conservative bloc in the legislature that says we should not have government artificially raising the price of goods and services. So this seemed to be kind of the next target of the legislature. We do have bills introduced in both the Assembly and the Senate to repeal minimum markup, but at this point it does not appear that bill will move. The issue, however, will remain on the radar and is likely to be brought back up sometime next January. Another issue that received a lot of attention was the ban of the sale of fetal tissue. We had a package of abortion bills, Planned Parenthood bills, and then of course this fetal tissue bill. This has faced significant opposition not only from the university, who worries about its impact on research, but also from the business community who shares some of the same concerns. It does not appear the legislature will take up this bill. Then a bill that we should all be familiar with relates to the jurisdiction of 17-year-olds. This bill would return first-time nonviolent 17-year-olds from the adult system back to the juvenile system, where of course counties are responsible for their care. WCA is incredibly supportive of this public policy. Unfortunately, over the past 10 or 12 years, every time this bill has been introduced, it has not provided funding needed to cover county costs. So WCA has opposed it, again, not on the policy, but because of the funding element. So until the legislature prioritizes funding, we think this costs about $15.8 million a year. It does not appear this bill will pass the legislature. Another hot topic, guns allowed on school zones. This is just something that's recently gained a lot of traction. Again, legislative leadership, especially in the Assembly, has said they just don't have the votes to pass this. And then transportation funding. As was alluded to earlier, during the state budget, we had this unusual period of about a month where the Budget Writing Committee, the Joint Committee on Finance, didn't meet. They basically adjourned. Heading into the budget, legislative leaders had said, look, we control both houses of the legislature, plus the governor's office. We want to be out of here by Memorial Day. So it looked like they were getting closer and closer to that Memorial Day finish line, and then transportation came up. And the legislature, again, couldn't come up with a solution. The Senate and the Assembly couldn't agree on something. So for about a month, they recessed. Following a compromise that was reached, legislative leaders indicated that transportation remains kind of that 800-pound gorilla in the room. So we need to do something about it. We shouldn't wait until the next budget so we have the same debate, potentially the same stalemate that we faced in this budget in the next one. We should do something immediately. And unfortunately, while there are a few proposals relating to county transportation that Dan will touch on, we don't have any long-term solution on transportation funding that will occur over the next month. The other thing I would note, though, two of these are connected. One is transportation funding, and the other is the repeal of minimum markup. So according to a number of estimates, minimum markup raises the price of gasoline anywhere between 5 and 8 cents per gallon. Some folks in the transportation industry believe that potentially these two items would be tied together in the next budget, that they would eliminate minimum markup, which has a potential to reduce the price of gasoline, and then also increase the gas tax by 4 or 5 cents. So that's something that people will be watching very closely. And again, because minimum markup will not be acted on this legislative session, we may see those two items merged heading into the next legislature. So with that, we'll delve down into individual pieces of legislation. And I think we have Dan up next.
All right. Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm going to set this. I got to find a place to set this. Before I get started, I just want to say this. Just a pleasure to be here with all you. I was talking to my father. He says to me, he says, Dan, it's so fortunate. You got a great job down in medicine. You're just so mature. Things are going well. But I'm a single guy. And he says, Dan, you really got to find a girlfriend. But whatever you do, make sure she's a Viking fan. I said, Dad, I'm a Packer fan. Why a Viking fan? He says, Dan, get a girlfriend who's a Viking fan because she'll never expect a ring. So, what can I say? Got that for Wisconsinite. So, all right. So, you got to have fun with this stuff, guys. So, we're going to start out with transportation and public works and a bill we've been working on. And this is a federal exchange bill, otherwise known as a transportation swap, authored by Representative Dewey Strobel and Representative Rob Brooks. They've been working with us on this bill. Essentially, what this bill would do, it relates to what's known as the STP program, or the Surface Transportation Program. Bill exchanges federal funds for state funds in the STP program, the local program that is used to repair roads and bridges and other infrastructure in local communities. And what that helps us do is capture efficiency. When we replace federal funds with state funds, we get out of the regulatory red tape that's associated with them. And that's simply what this does. And this takes the federal money, applies the federal money to more complex projects, like, say, the zoo interchange. And then it takes the state money and applies it to our STP program. And I think it's important to note, when I say complex and less complex projects, if you think about County Highway B in your county, and then you think about the zoo interchange, you probably won't apply the same level of regulatory guidance to County Highway B that you would, say, the zoo interchange. So that's what this bill does, essentially swaps the state funds for federal funds and applies the state funds to less complex projects. We are hoping to have a hearing on this bill. We've had the bill introduced, but we've not had a hearing yet, and we are running out of time. But this is something I think long-term we want to talk about, because one of the things you hear about in transportation is the need to find efficiencies, to be more efficient. That's sort of the buzzword out there, and we agree. And so, and one of the things the legislature has said, if you're going to raise more money for transportation or generate more revenue, you really ought to find efficiencies. Well, this is one that we can point to that we think would be a dramatic improvement for our guys. So that's where we are on that. And feel free to jump in with questions if you have them as we go on. Good, you guys are good. Another proposal, what's that? So there is opposition to that swap bill. There is opposition to that bill from some pretty powerful interests, the operating engineers, the road builders. And I think from the fight in the budget over prevailing wage, there's just sort of not really an appetite to get back there, because when you do swap out federal funds for state funds, what happens is Davis-Bacon is applicable to any project who uses even $1 of federal funds. So that's a prevailing wage standard that the federal government uses. And so it sort of becomes the gorilla in the room with that issue is prevailing wage, i.e. Davis-Bacon at the federal level. And I just think that's sort of a fight that some of the legislative leadership and some of the other partners, some of our partners in the transportation world want to avoid. And so we have diverging views with some of our partners on that, and we respectfully disagree with them. But this is something we think will help us be more efficient, and something we'll continue to look at. Okay. So there's also AB 210, transportation sales tax. This is Representative Knudsen who introduced this bill earlier this session. It's had a hearing, and I testified on it, actually. And the bill, what it allows the county to do is simply enact a half-a-cent sales tax for transportation purposes. Sales tax needs to be approved by voters at a referenda at the county level, countywide. And the bill did pass the Assembly Committee, the Transportation Committee, unanimously, and is now available for scheduling. Still, it's possible that the Assembly will pass this. There is opposition in the Senate, and so I think we don't know if this will pass fully, but there's a chance. We're hopeful, and something we would push for. Just another tool in your toolbox at the county level to give you more options on transportation costs. And then one of the things we're working on, too, are issues related to work zone safety. As a lot of you have heard, and in your counties you know, that there have been 4 fatalities around the state in the past year, 2015. So one of the things we wanted to do was try to have an emphasis in this legislative session on work zone safety. And so the chair of the Transportation Committee, Jerry Petrowski, authored a bill that would prohibit the use of handheld devices, i.e. cell phones, in work zones. You'd still be able to use them in areas that weren't under construction, that weren't a work zone. But this is something we've hoped to push forward, and the bill has had a hearing in both Transportation Committees, Assembly and Senate. And so we hope to push this forward, this proposal, SB 135, AB 198. Obviously, this was taken up early in the session. Okay, moving along to environment and land use issues, and boy, I know I've talked to a lot of you about the issue of shoreland zoning, and we all know about the changes in Act 55. And what happened in Act 55, as you know, there's a lot of things that went on with shoreland zoning. But I think the big thing, the largest item that is most consequential for counties in Act 55 relates to NR 115. That's the Administrative Rule Regulating Shoreland Zoning. And that used to be a minimum standard or a baseline standard. Essentially, what Act 55 did is lock this in to NR 115. Counties have to use NR 115, and so in other words, if you had previously a 150-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark, now you have a 75 setback that you're locked into. And so that's a problem going forward. So what this bill does, AB 603, and thank you to Representative Jarko and also Senator LeMahieu for introducing this bill. And I know Representative Jarko in Act 55 was one of the proponents of the changes, and he's a big property rights guy, but he's been very good to work with. And one of the things he's worked with us on is trying to give counties a little bit of flexibility. And so this bill does scale back some of the county shoreline zoning preemption that occurred in Act 55. We do support the bill strongly. And I think the big thing that this bill does is allow for setback averaging. So, and let me give you an example of that. Let's say I have a vacant lot. Let's say I did get a girlfriend who's a Viking fan. And let's say I got neighbors, and I got Mark on one side of me, and I got Kyle on the other. And back before Act 55, they built their houses. And so they were set back. They had to follow the county setback average, which was 150 feet. Well, now Act 55 is passed. I'm going to live between Mark and Kyle with my new beautiful bride, Viking fan. And now, because of Act 55, I can build at 75 feet back. But they're already 150 feet back because of the previous policy that was in place by the county. So what happens is I'm like, hey, Kyle, Mark, got this nice lot. Want to come over for a barbecue? No, Dan. You're destroying our viewing corridor. Our property values are declining because I'm now at 75 feet. I'm in front of them. And so it's a major problem. And so this allows for setback averaging so the county can say, hey, you know what? Mark and Kyle had to build back 150 feet. Dan, you can't just come in at 75. So anyway, that gives us some flexibility to ensure that we protect both current and incoming property owners, or people who are developing, or people who have already developed and developed previous to Act 55. Make sense? Recycling funding. Now, you may recall there was a first-year $4 million cut to recycling. Typically, we had in the past was $20 million. In the second year of the biennium, we get $20 million. In the first year of the biennium, we get 16. So it's a $4 million cut. And so in the Environmental Management Fund, Senator Coles was able to find us $3 million right now is what he's found so far, based on I'd say what's been reported by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. He's found this money. This is the unused balance in the Environmental Management Fund, and so this would help restore some of that first year cut, about 3/4 of it. So it's a pretty good deal for us. And then, of course, another bill that we're strongly opposed to relates to a bill that singles out Dane County and Dane County zoning. Bill allows individual towns in Dane County to unilaterally withdraw from county zoning. I think all the townships right now, in fact, I know that all the townships in Dane County are currently in county zoning. This would single out Dane County and allow townships and counties to withdraw. There have been previous bills to do this, to take this concept statewide, and those have failed to get traction. But this is a bill that does seem to have some traction. The bill has received a public hearing in both the Senate and the Assembly, and has also been execed in the Senate. And I believe the Assembly is going to exec this bill tomorrow, and then it will be available for scheduling. WCA, as I said, is opposed to this particular piece of legislation. And so that ends my update on transportation and environmental land use. And so I will turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Dietrich Kastorf.
All right, good afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about legislation in two different issue areas, health and human services and judicial and public safety. First bill I want to talk about is one that Kyle mentioned briefly, and it's one of a series of bills that we have seen throughout this legislative session that deals with child welfare. I have to say, one of the things I've noticed this particular legislative session, and I think your human services directors will tell you the same thing, this is the most prolific session that I can remember when it comes to bills impacting county health and human services departments, and in particular, the child welfare system. So we've been busy working with a lot of our human services directors across the state, reviewing a number of bills, spending a lot of time taking a look at them, trying to determine the impacts on our individual counties. And this is the bill that I think we have spent the most time on, Senate Bill 326 and Assembly Bill 429. Again, this is one of 4 bills that's included in the Justice for Children package, which was authored by Senator Rob Coles on behalf of the State Attorney General. The bill, in essence, requires county child welfare agencies to refer all cases that are reported to the agency to law enforcement. It then requires all of our child welfare agencies and law enforcement to coordinate the planning and execution of the investigation of all cases, And then it requires all reports to be referred to law enforcement within 12 hours with no exclusion for Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays. Now, just hearing that, and on its face, you might think, well, that sounds reasonable, right? Somebody's calling in with a concern about a child's safety, and of course we should refer all those cases to law enforcement. However, this bill was crafted without any input whatsoever from our county human services departments. They did not talk to the State Department of Children and Families, which operates the child welfare system in Milwaukee County. And our thought, and based on the language included in the bill, is that this bill could actually have a negative impact on child welfare practice across the state and also have a negative impact on children and families statewide. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the reasons why we were opposed to this bill, why we spent a lot of time on it, and why we think it's to the benefit of the children and families of the state that this bill not move forward. So we had three main issues with the bill. The first issue is the referral of all cases to law enforcement. Now, in the child welfare world, there's such things as cases that get screened in and cases that get screened out. Right now, the majority of your counties, if not all of your counties, because it's required by child welfare standard, have entered into a memorandum of understanding with law enforcement. And within that memorandum of understanding, you've already decided with law enforcement what cases are going to be referred to law enforcement and which ones are not. So we think the MOU already takes care of this referral issue. But on top of that, this bill would require all cases, whether we've screened them in or screened them out. So in the instance where we've screened out cases, and let me give you some examples of screened out cases. Right around the time this bill was being talked about, I had a number of human services directors down to Madison for a meeting on the bill. What they indicated was that they get quite the variety of calls coming in to the agency. One call came in to a county because a child has a cheese sandwich for lunch every day. Now, do we think that warrants child welfare and law enforcement intervention? Likely not. Another case, a grandmother called in because her ex-son-in-law, and let me stress, it's her ex-son-in-law, and we get lots of these types of cases as well, allowed the children ages 11 and 13 to watch the movies Halloween and Friday the 13th. Now, do we need to get law enforcement involved in that case? No. So we have the concern with this bill is not only are we going to have to expend resources working with law enforcement on these types of cases, but as well, it's going to hurt our ability to work with families in what tends to be best practices within the child welfare system. Right now, we have a number of counties, I think around 15 in the state, that are working on alternative response. We have families that are engaging in voluntary services with our human services departments. We also have a lot of our counties working on trauma-informed care and making trauma and using the trauma-informed philosophy within the types of services that they're providing. The minute we bring law enforcement into some of these families, they tend to shut down, they won't voluntarily work with us, and then the child and the family are both harmed by that. The second major issue we had with the bill deals with working together on the planning and execution of the investigation of all cases. Again, we had some questions because we were very uncertain as to what that meant. And in addition, when we have screened out cases, we no longer have jurisdiction to investigate those cases. So we were going to be told to investigate cases that we no longer have jurisdiction to investigate. That's a problem. Third issue with the bill, of course, was the 12 hours. The 12 hours was very strict within the legislation. Any case screened in, screened out, have to refer to law enforcement within 12 hours. The concern there is it didn't give us any flexibility to really prioritize the more egregious cases and work with law enforcement on those immediately. We had to do the referral and plan, how we were going to investigate the case immediately. So of the four bills that are part of the AG's Justice for Children package, two of the four bills are definitely moving forward. One of the bills has passed one house. We're not certain it's going to pass the other house. And this bill, we think, is not going to move anywhere the rest of this floor session. The Senate did exec this bill out of committee. The Assembly has not exec the bill out of the committee. It was scheduled for an executive session and was pulled from that calendar for that day within the committee, and we do not expect this bill to go anywhere. Again, I just want to publicly thank a number of human services directors who spent a lot of time working on this issue. In particular, the directors from Calumet, Marathon, Portage, and Waupaca County spent a lot of time working with us on this issue. And Racine County spent a lot of time working on this as well. So I want to thank them very much for all their support on this particular issue. Next issue, the slide here on 17-year-old juvenile offenders. I don't really have much more to add here than what Kyle had already talked about. Again, it's very supportive of the public policy. The only issue we have with the legislation is funding. And again, the bill has not had a public hearing yet in either house of the legislature, even though the bill was introduced several months ago. And we do not again anticipate this bill to move anywhere this legislative session. Now I'm going to talk about, the next several slides really talk about a whole series of bills, and I'm not going to go through each and every bill within the list, but I just want to give you a little bit of a broad overview as to what the legislature is working on. So back in August, Speaker Robin Vos appointed the Speaker's Task Force on Alzheimer's and Dementia. Representative Mike Rohrkast chaired the task force. They held a number of public hearings across the state. Most of the public hearings were combined with site visits. I know a couple of our county nursing homes served as hosts to these committees, and also they provided tours of their facilities as well to the members of the committee. While the task force came out with a series of 10 bills on the 20th of January, held a public hearing on those bills about a week or so later. All of the bills that came out of the task force were up in executive session yesterday in the Committee on Mental Health. All 10 of the bills were passed out of the committee. Some of them had some amendments to them, but for the most part, the bills were leaving the committee intact. Some of the topics of this legislation include training for an individual in order to deem and use the title dementia specialist. There are some funding included in the bill that would provide training grants for our county mobile crisis teams to learn a little bit more about how they should be working with individuals who have some form of dementia. There's also a bill as well that talks about putting increased funding in respite care for individuals who are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia, and to assist their families. So again, there's in total a series of 10 bills. The bills I put up on the slide are the bills that would have the most direct impact on counties. Given the fact that these bills come from the Speaker's Task Force, we're relatively confident that these bills are going to move through and pass the State Assembly. The question is what's going to happen with them in the State Senate. There's, I believe, in total a $2 million price tag to these bills. We heard again, I think last week, that there is some concern with the state's fiscal condition, that revenues didn't come in as high as anticipated, and the majority leader of the Senate had indicated he'd be hesitant to take up any bills that spend money. What we did hear is that the Senate is taking a look at this legislation. It may be crafting some of its own bills and making its own package as well in response to what may come over from the Assembly. So we'll have to wait and see what happens once these bills hit the Senate as to whether or not they're going to move forward and what dollar amount that the Senate would be willing to allocate to this series of bills. Next set of bills talks about the issue of mental health reform. Last session we heard a lot on the area of mental health reform. We had a Speaker's Task Force on mental health. There was a lot of focus also in the last two state budgets on providing additional funding and some flexibility in the provision of services to individuals who have a mental illness. Based on all the work that was done last session, this session Speaker Vos again created a mental health committee within the Assembly. That committee is chaired by Representative Paul Tittle, who some of you may remember was the former Manitowoc County Board Chair before he ran and successfully became a member of the State Assembly. Representative Tittle has been working for a number of months on a series of bills related to mental health reform, in particular trying to find ways to deal with the shortage of mental health providers across the state, trying to in essence, find a way to make it easier for kids to access mental health services within the school setting, and in general, Obviously, I think many of you know, and I've heard from a number of counties across the state, you guys have all indicated you have difficulty trying to find mental health services within your county, trying to attract and retain mental health providers, and this series of bills is really intended to try to help with that. This set of bills that Representative Tittle has introduced is scheduled for a public hearing tomorrow in the Assembly Committee on Health. Some of these bills, in particular, that I know some of our counties have indicated support of, include creating an individual income tax deduction for certain income earned by an individual from the practice of psychiatry, providing stipends for individuals who have mental illness who serve on the Wisconsin Council on Mental Health, allowing qualified treatment trainees provide mental health services, again, to help with the shortage of mental health providers within the state. And also it relaxes some of the rules for prior authorization for mental health services for individuals who are in the medical assistance program. And I know that's one of the things I think our county human services folks are most excited about. In particular, there's a provision in this bill that says you can have 24 hours of services before you have to go and apply for prior authorization. So that's something that I think will help tremendously as well with our counties being able to access services for individuals with mental illness that we are serving. Another set of bills, and another interesting issue that has come up within the state is the issue of sex trafficking. There has been 3 bills, at least, that have been introduced this session that deal with the issue of sex trafficking. Assembly Bill 267 was introduced early on. While it is authored by a Democrat, there's some, a number of bipartisan support for the issue. But I do not believe AB 267 is going to go anywhere this session. It has a relatively high price tag associated with it. Assembly Bill 489, while it's deemed a sex trafficking bill, it actually makes a number of changes to the child welfare system, including changing the definition of abuse and neglect, which would mean that if you think the number of calls we get in child welfare now is tremendous, the definitional changes that are included in this bill would in essence probably double or triple the number of calls our child welfare workers receive. So we are opposed to this bill, and that bill not going anywhere. There's nobody in support of AB 489. The bill that may get some traction, may go somewhere, and it was introduced relatively recently, is Senate Bill 618 and Assembly Bill 737. This bill, from the county's perspective, includes child sex trafficking in the definition of child abuse. It also talks about investigating child abuse reports in which the person who is not a caregiver of the child is suspected of permitting, allowing, or encouraging the child to engage in prostitution or of child sex trafficking for purposes of a commercial sex act. The reason I mention this is a bill that might go, but it does have a price tag associated with it. The price tag comes, of course, with the change in definition to allow sex trafficking to be part of the definition of child abuse, which means now if there are girls or children that are currently being trafficked and they come to the attention of law enforcement, they would then come to the attention of our human services workers, and we would have to treat them in the same manner as a child who is being abused or neglected, by a family member or by a non-caregiver. This bill, though, has a price tag of somewhere between $4.6 million and $12.3 million annually. That's based on figures run by the State Department of Children and Families, who, of course, would likely see the bulk of this caseload as, again, they operate the system within Milwaukee County. So, again, this is just an issue that I think we're seeing a lot of talk on this legislative session. And since they claim Wisconsin tends to be a hub for sex trafficking in the Midwest, I wouldn't be surprised if this is an issue that we continue to see in the next legislative session as well. Public benefit reform, again, that's something that we've seen an awful lot of this session. I think it started in the state budget when there were provisions included to drug test individuals who are receiving public assistance or support. There's a number of bills that have been introduced this session that deal with public benefit reform. Both the Senate and Assembly now have public benefit reform committees. Of these bills that are listed here, I think there's only one that may have a chance of actually being adopted this session, and that would be Assembly Bill 200 and Senate Bill 136, which requires a waiver to limit the number of food share replacement cards. So that bill has passed out of the Assembly, and it's out of the Senate committee and is available for Senate floor action. But again, I just wanted to highlight this because I think next session as well, we may continue to see a number of bills introduced dealing with individuals who are receiving public benefits. This is a new issue, DHS 16515 request that came to our attention last week. A request was made on behalf of the State Department of Health Services on January 26th of this year by the State Department of Administration under 16515 request. And in essence, these are 16515. It's a request that has to go before the Joint Committee on Finance that allows state agencies to transfer funding from one appropriation to the next. DHS, within this request, is asking for $15 to $16 million for two items. The first item that they are requesting funding for deals with treatment to competency. So when an individual is arrested, they go to court, they go to their plea hearing, and they indicate that they're not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The State Department of Health Services needs to get that individual into one of the state mental health institutes in order to determine whether they are first competent or not, and if they are not competent, then they need to work with that individual to bring them to competency so that they can assist in their own defense. Right now, the forensic beds within the state mental health institutes are full. So when an individual comes into court, oftentimes that individual, instead of being able to be placed immediately in a mental health institute after pleading not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, they end up sitting in a county jail until such time as a bed opens up. Right now, there are 42 individuals sitting in county jails on waiting lists. The reason that this issue is coming to the forefront now is in Milwaukee County, the chief judge has told the Department of Health Services, in essence, that we're going to be holding you in contempt if you don't get the individuals out of the jails and get them into mental health institutes for treatment to competency. So the state is doing a few things relative to that. First, they are trying to perform some of the competency evaluations and some of the work within the jails. And two, they need to obviously add some beds, which involves remodeling of the institutes. So they have a plan in place to undertake some minor remodeling of some buildings that they currently have on the grounds of Winnebago and Mendota in order to be able to take additional forensic patients. The second, and that's about $5 million of the request. The remainder of the request deals with facility infrastructure enhancements to the two state mental health institutes and to the state centers to support an electronic health records system. The State Department of Corrections is going to be undertaking a software purchase to implement an electronic health records system. The Department of Health Services wants to piggyback on that software purchase from the Department of Corrections. However, if you've seen any of the state institutions, you know they're very old, the facilities are outdated, and they need to make infrastructure changes within the facilities in order to support the software to implement the electronic health records system. So because of that, they, on top of the $5 million, this request adds about 10 to 11 million. They're seeking 10 to 11 million to make these facility upgrades. So the question is, where does the revenue come from? And this is where the counties come in. The revenue source for this expenditure authority is fees that are collected from counties for placements in the state mental health institutes and reimbursement from third-party insurance, Medicaid, and Medicare for institution payments. So DHS came in and met with Kyle and I last week and said, look, we really need your help on this one. We have no choice. We have been before the Building Commission on several occasions trying to get our infrastructure updates included in the capital budget. We have been denied multiple times, and I think as we heard about, the difficulties with the state transportation budget and the fact that they had a bond a lot in the transportation budget last time, they keep getting denied because legislators are concerned about the level of bonding in the state. So they said, we have to do this in order to piggyback. Is this something you could support us on? Now, in talking to our counties, a lot of them understand the reason for this, But of course, there was some concern about, well, have we been overcharged at the institutes all these years? What exactly is going on? We're paying you $1,025 a day. Isn't that enough? And there is within that I should say there's money, that appropriation right now has $33 million sitting in it. $20 million of that comes from county payments to the state. The other $13 million comes from federal reimbursements. So there's $20 million out there that's being used for this project that counties are saying, wait a minute, we have some concerns. Why is this money not being returned to us? Now, when we look at this from a political perspective, I'll tell you this. We're not getting that money back as counties. Right now, there are a lot of legislators at the end of session who have lots of priorities, lots of things that they want to have funded, and now here's a lovely funding source for it. So we said to DHS, look, a couple of things we want from you on this. First, there's going to be $8.7 million left in the appropriation when all is said and done, when this request is approved by the Finance Committee. Can you work with us to find a way to get the $8.7 million back to counties for community mental health programming in the next budget? The Secretary said, I'm absolutely open to working with you guys on this. The second thing we said to them is, we want to make sure this doesn't happen again. So are you willing to work with us on language very similar to language that exists in state statutes right now with regard to placements in the juvenile correctional institutes that says once the funding and that appropriation hits a certain level, anything above that gets returned back to counties. And again, they've indicated that they'd be willing to talk to us about that particular issue. This issue we thought was going to come up in finance this week, and now we believe it's going to be taken up sometime next week by the Finance Committee. Okay, moving on to judicial and public safety. Two really quick issues here. First issue deals with coroner legislation. Some of you may remember last session there was a coroner's bill that was introduced that would have done a number of things, including required an elected coroner to participate in training, and if the elected coroner did not participate in the training, the oversight board would petition the governor and ask the governor to remove the coroner. Obviously, we indicated a lot of concern with that because as a constitutional officer, you can't really legislate any additional qualifications for the office beyond what is in the Constitution. Second concern we had with the legislation last session dealt with law enforcement investigation and the fact that within the coroner's legislation, in essence, there was language in there that wouldn't even require law enforcement to be notified in a number of situations in which a death has occurred. So obviously, you can imagine our sheriffs were extremely, extremely concerned about that. So a new coroner bill was drafted this session by Representative Schra. He decided to take the issue up. He called us in. We met with the sheriffs. We met with the Coroners and Medical Examiners Association and said, well, what can we do to get the counties on board with this? So we came up with a list of items, including there was language in the draft that, in essence, would prohibit counties from paying for the cost of burial or cremation from the budget of the coroner or medical examiner. We said we have some concerns with that language and need that removed from the bill. We didn't quite understand why we would put a line item for burial and cremation, say, in the highway department budget, as opposed to the budget of the, the coroner or medical examiner. But the bill would have prohibited us from so doing. Again, we also told them we needed to protect the sheriff's ability to, secure a crime scene and to have access to the crime scene and to be notified of any suspicious deaths. We also said that we would like language removed that was going to require the counties to pay for this type of training. We made, in essence, 4 requests of the bill author. All of our requests were granted. So at this point in time, we as an association, the Badger State Sheriff's Association, have indicated that based on the changes to the bill, we no longer have any concerns. This bill was just this morning or this afternoon, late this morning or early this afternoon, put out for co-sponsorship. They want to still try to get this bill run through very quickly and passed yet this legislative session, and there may be some support for that since all of the opposition has now been removed. So this is something that we could potentially see move through quickly this session. Last item I'm going to talk to you about is probation and parole. This is an issue that we've been working on, dare I say, since I think I started at the association. And we think we could have the potential to make some progress this session. Two bills have been introduced: Assembly Bill 389, or Assembly Bill 522, and Senate Bill 389 by Senator Markland and Representative Steffen. And if you try to look up these bills, I'm going to tell you right now, you have to look at the substitute amendment and the supplemental fiscal note in order to understand what exactly the bill does and how it is that we as counties are going to see some benefit from this legislation. What the bill does is it directs the Department of Corrections to transfer to the appropriation that reimburses counties for probation and parole holds any funding that remains in the state appropriation that is funded by fees that they collect from individuals on probation, parole, or extended supervision after all the state's expenses are paid. So they collect the fees from individuals on probation, parole, extended supervision. They put them in an appropriation. They pay out the cost. And whatever is left in that appropriation gets transferred into the appropriation that is used to reimburse counties for probation and parole holds. If this legislation would have been in place in the last state fiscal year, our counties would have received the statutory reimbursement rate of $40 per day. We have not been at that $40 per day rate since 2004. So we think that this is a great way for counties to get a little extra money in the P&P for probation and parole holds, while at the same time not increasing any fees and not utilizing any state GPR. So we really think Representative Steffen and Senator Markline did a great job in working with the Department of Corrections on coming up with a creative way in order to try to make counties whole for probation and parole holds. So with that, I think that ends my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle.
Okay. Very briefly, we just have a few more bills. I think in the interest of time, if you have any questions, if you could just write them down, and then later this afternoon we have a segment, Ask the Attorney, Ask the WCA staff. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions at that point, or any time tonight that you run into Sarah, Dan, or I, we can answer questions that you may have. County Oregon personnel, an issue that I'm sure every person in this room is aware of, relates to veterans legislation. This legislation went out for co-sponsorship last week and garnered significant attention from the county veteran service officers. The bill made a number of changes to the Department of Veterans Affairs, but it made a few changes to county operations. First, under current law, counties shall hire a CVSO. That's the law. You have to have a CVSO. That CVSO has to be a veteran. Under this bill, counties would have had the option of whether or not to hire a CVSO. They would still have to have somebody in the county certified by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs to provide veteran services, but it wouldn't have to be a veteran. So it could be a human resource benefit specialist. But it was optional. It gave counties the option. The second thing the bill did was it created a pilot program, a consortia, that was designed for northern Wisconsin counties. There have been an 8 or 9 member consortia, once again optional to counties. And the Department of Veterans Affairs was transferring $250,000 into that consortia. So again, if counties in northern Wisconsin wanted to join it, provide some services regionally, they could do so and have the potential to have access to the $250,000. The third change that this bill made to CVSOs is it prohibited CVSOs from assisting veterans in obtaining DMV or DNR licenses or permits. So these are things like your veterans identification on your driver's license, or state park passes or hunting licenses, things like that. Since the bill has been circulated, and just over the past few days, the bill authors, due to mounting pressure from county CVSOs and other veterans groups, have decided to pull all this out of the bill. So at this point, the bill will not include any changes to the CVSOs, but may include the creation of a task force that WCA would sit on, along with CVSOs and the Department of Veterans Affairs, to try to work on improving services to veterans. Vital records. This is a bill that's been spearheaded by the Wisconsin Register of Deeds Association. I can't give them enough credit for how well they've kind of lined up their ducks with this bill. They didn't get it drafted until, I believe, Thanksgiving, which is kind of late in the session. But because they did their homework, they got all the groups on board, all the stakeholders involved early on. We are very hopeful that this legislation will pass over the next few weeks. Essentially, the bill allows individuals to obtain copies of vital records from their local Register of Deeds office. So under current law, if an individual wants a copy of their birth certificate, for example, and they go to their county, while the county can pull it up and see it, only the county that that person was born in can actually give them the record. So in some cases, somebody may be in Kenosha looking for their birth certificate and find out they have to travel up to Ashland to get a copy, even though it's sitting in front of our local Register of Deeds. This bill is a common sense solution. It would allow individuals to obtain these records in their home county. And again, we're very hopeful it will pass. It's been fast-tracked through committees. It will be exec tomorrow, I believe. So again, a lot of credit to the Register of Deeds Association. Taxation and finance. Managed forest law. Senator Tiffany has spearheaded a bill that would make numerous changes to managed forest law. The Managed Forest Law program. Specifically, as it relates to counties, it would do two things. It would eliminate the yield and severance tax that local governments currently receive through harvesting on these lands. However, it would allow counties and towns to retain money from the closed acreage fee. So right now, if you enroll your land in MFL, you can either designate it as open or closed to the public. If it's open to the public, you pay a substantially smaller rate than you do if it's closed. If it's open to the public, the county gets 20% of the money generated, the town gets 80%. If it's closed, the county collects the money but sends it all to DNR. This bill would return that closed acreage payment, so although we lose the severance tax, by giving us the closed acreage payment, counties would receive an additional $2 to $4 million. Our only concern with this bill when it was first drafted was that we had two counties that under this system would have actually received less money under this bill than current law. That's since been addressed, so every county will receive at least the same amount of money under this bill's current law or additional funds, and we're hopeful that this legislation will pass over the next few weeks. Finally, an interesting bill, the personal property tax. This bill has been introduced by Representative Culp. One of the interesting components of this is this bill was actually circulated for co-sponsorship back in March. The minute it was circulated, the Counties Association, the school groups, the other municipal groups, and the Realtors Association contacted the legislature and essentially put the bill in a holding pattern. The bill was just introduced, however, last week. There is not a Senate version. We do not expect this bill to go anywhere this legislative session. However, this is an issue we're working very closely with the business community on because there is appetite in the state legislature to repeal both the personal property tax and the related computer aid payment that counties and other units of local government receive. Then finally, a bill that we've long asked for relating to county flexibility. This bill provides counties flexibility in the publishing of unclaimed funds notice in the local newspaper. Under current law, every 2 years, counties are required to publish a notice of all individuals in the county who have unclaimed funds of at least $10 or more. That notice has to be a Class 3 notice, meaning it has to be published 3 times in its entirety in 3 consecutive weeks in the local newspaper. Of course, with digitization and the different ways that people are getting their news, we feel this is overly burdensome and an area where we could find some flexibility. What this bill would allow is counties to publish 1 Class 1 notice with everybody's names, and then follow that with 2 Class 2 notices that would simply say the full listing is available both in the county treasurer's office and on the county's website. So again, a common sense approach to save counties money. The fiscal on this ranges from a few $1,000s in some counties to tens of thousands in others. Historically, this has received opposition, as you may expect, from the Wisconsin Newspapers Association. But to this point, they are neutral on the Government Accountability Board registration. So with that, we thank you again for your time. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them at the Ask Attorney, Ask the Staff segment, or anytime throughout the night. Thank you.
We're going to take just a quick 10-minute break. So at 2:05, let's reconvene. Then we'll hear from Mr. Michael Williamson, head of the State of Wisconsin Investment Board, followed by Peter Fagan of the Bucks. So quick 10-minute break, 2:05, we will reconvene. I can make a PDF of it because it's a keynote presentation, so there's a lot of video and sound going on. But I could make a copy of it and give back. I will. I will put my notes attached to yes. With my notes attached to that item. I'll set this up for you so it's easily understood. And then you do with it what you want. Okay? Take this too in case we forget.
So, hi, Sarah with the county.
Hi, Michael Williams.
Hi, nice to meet you. So we should be set to go. Phil, please switch it off from this computer onto mine, and then the presentation's all loaded. We just have to go forward back. And the red. So can we use that? Yep. So we should be all set.
Keep an eye out for a while.
You know, I tell you, there are times I look at clickers and I'm like, which way? Up, down, left, right.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats, we'll begin the next segment of the program. And if I could ask my colleagues to bring in our guests, we'll reconvene. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Mr. Michael Williamson. I was doing some quick math, and as it turns out, Michael and I met actually 30 years ago, 1986, when Michael was, I think at that time, Mr. Williamson was working for the University of Wisconsin, and I was at the State Budget Office in the Department of Administration. Since that time, I stayed, and Michael went on to great things, and now he's back here in Wisconsin and overseeing the State of Wisconsin Investment Board. The Wisconsin retirement system in Wisconsin, among all the things we do in state government, it is perhaps the thing we do best. It is an incredibly well-run system and well-managed, but part of that good management are the investments, and the investments are done by the State of Wisconsin Investment Board. Quite frankly, we would put up the State of Wisconsin Investment Board against any team of investors in the world, investment specialists. They are that good, and they are led by someone that good. Please join me in giving a very warm Wisconsin County's welcome to State of Wisconsin Investment Board Executive Director, Mr. Michael Williamson.
Wow, that was quite an introduction there. I wish my girlfriend and my mother had been here. My girlfriend would have enjoyed it. My mother would have believed it. So, if you can't tell already, I talk a little different than you folks. People ask me all the time, they say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Southern Wisconsin." Down near the Illinois line. And they say, "Really?" And I say, "No, I'm from North Carolina originally. I came to Wisconsin in 1979. I had the opportunity to work in the state budget office. I worked in the governor's office for Lee Dreyfus. I worked as chief of staff for Joe Sensenbrenner when he was mayor, and then I worked at the UW, which Mark alluded to, as assistant to Donna Shalala. Then I went back to North Carolina and ran the North Carolina pension plan for 10 years. But what a lot of people don't know is I got my start in public service working in local government. I got out of undergraduate school in 1976, and I gotten accepted into 3 law schools, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be a lawyer. So I said, well, maybe I'll just take a little time off, and I went back to my hometown in western North Carolina, 7,200 people. And I said, I either get a job working in a law office as an assistant so I can figure out what this business is, or I'll get a job in a nonprofit, or I'll work in government. You know, I was 22 years old, and I thought I want to give back. So what I did was I went into the city manager's office, the little town manager's office, and gave him my resume, and I said I'd like to get a job working here with the town. And of course I had absolutely no qualifications or experience that would do that, and he told me absolutely he had no job. So about a week later I was out in the garden plowing my granny's garden, and the phone rang, and I went in and answered the phone, and it was the town manager. He says, "I want to offer you a job getting right-of-ways." And I said, well, I got 2 questions for you. First of all, what's a right-of-way? And he told me if it's for a sewer line, an 18-inch sewer line that ran through the town. And I said, the second one is, how much are you paying? And he said, $6,500 a year. I said, I'll take it. That was my first job. I went to work, and I spent pretty much the next year and a half sitting on people's porches, drinking sweet tea, and talking to 120 different property owners. We were going to put that sewer line across, 18 inches. We were paying $3 a linear foot to put it in the backyard, dig up their backyard, put the sewer line in, and have the rights to come back and dig it up any other time. And if we put a manhole and a manhole cover in their yard, we paid them an extra $150. I got 118 out of the 120. Two of them took us to court, and we had to use condemnation to get the right of way to go across that. And one of them shot at the crew when we put them on the project. So I had to go get the police chief, go talk to her. So that turned out to be pretty interesting. And about that time, there was a little scandal in the town. It appeared that some of the department heads were paying a little elevated prices for goods, and then there would be a stereo show up at their home in an unmarked box. Some of the aldermen found out about it, and they and the town manager decided that they wanted to have a purchasing department. We needed a purchasing department. Well, I became the first purchasing agent for the town of Waynesville. And so at 23 years old, I was buying garbage trucks, jackhammers, steel-toed boots, and office supplies for a town. That was a pretty fascinating experience. And then the next little incident occurred was that we had a couple of women that worked in the front office, and one of them started dating the mayor. Well, it would have been bad enough in its own right, except the mayor was married. And so they began to talk about these little liaisons they had around the office and stuff, and the performance of the woman began to taper off. She wasn't doing a very good job. And the town clerk, who was an older gentleman, wrote her up for her performance review, and she didn't like that very much. So she went and talked to her boyfriend, who was the mayor, and the mayor and the town clerk had words in the back of the office, and they had a fist fight, and the town clerk quit. Well, you've kind of got a sense of how this is going. The next thing you know, I was a town clerk. I was doing accounts receivable and payable and payroll and supervising the office staff and putting in the first computer system, you know, and I'm all of a sudden 23 years old. And I'm going, this public sector work's kind of interesting. So I went back to graduate school and got my master's in public administration because I wanted to be a city county manager. And so I went to school, and you know, when you get out of grad school, you're looking for a job. You apply for everything that comes along because you need employment. And one of the applications that came along was for the state budget office. And I applied for that job, and they flew me up here in May. And I remember walking around the Capitol Square and thinking how beautiful this town was, and went down State Street. I didn't realize that the leaves had only been out 2 weeks on the trees. The azaleas, the dogwoods had already bloomed and gone in North Carolina, and the leaves had just come out up here. But it was a beautiful place. I ended up taking the job, and that's how I got to Wisconsin in 1979. But that's enough about me. I want to talk to you some today about the Wisconsin retirement system, the WRS. You heard Mark talk a little bit about it. It's a great system, and I want to talk with you a little bit about the role that we at the State of Wisconsin Investment Board do in helping to keep it that way. I also talk a little bit about employee trust funds, our sister agency that we manage the fund with, and then talk a little bit about our performance, the environment, the investment environment that we're in. I think you all are pretty much aware it's pretty choppy seas out there in terms of the financial markets these days. And then talk a little bit about the strategies, what we do at SWIB to try to keep it solid and keep it strong. So I know most of you are familiar with the system. You got employees that work in the system. You understand that. But let me just give you just a little bit of an overview. It's the 9th largest public pension plan in the country. Interestingly enough, the North Carolina pension plan, which I managed for 10 years, was the 10th largest system in the country. We got about 600,000 members in the plan. Virtually every public employee in the state of Wisconsin, except those in the city and county of Milwaukee, are in the system. We got 1,400 employers, of which you folks are some of. So it's a very healthy system. It's a large system, and it's also the 25th largest public or private plan. So it's a big system, and it covers, as I said, virtually every public employee in the state. But the other thing about the plan, and Mark alluded to this too, is that how well funded. According to the Pew Charitable Trust, there's only 2 public pension plans in the country that are funded at or near 100%. One of those is South Dakota, The other is Wisconsin. So we're very well blessed for that. Our neighbor to the south, which will go unnamed, 39%. And the national average, 72%. So the question is, you might ask, well, why is that? Well, why is Wisconsin so well funded? Well, there's three reasons. Number one is plan design. I think you all know that our members share the investment risk. When we make money, they get that money. We don't have a cost of living adjustment plan in there, but when we make money, they get that money. And over time, that's paid out extremely well. 4.1% over the last 30 years, average increases to our retirees. But when we lose money, like we did in 2008, along with everybody else in the country, then they basically give back some of those gains. Their floor, their benefit, their starting benefit that they get is never changed. You can never go below that. But the increases that you get after you retire, those are susceptible to come back. And that's what happens. So that's one, is plan design. The second thing is Wisconsin employers make their contributions. It's kind of the Wisconsin way. Well, if you look at what happened in Illinois, is they jacked up the benefits in the late 90s when they had a lot of money, and the legislature took a pass on funding those systems. When the budget got tight, they said, we'll just take a pass this year. We'll make it up next year. Well, next year never came. But in Wisconsin, people make their contributions. And the third thing is we've had strong investment results. A lot of people don't know this, but 75% of the money that's in the Wisconsin retirement system, and as of the end of the year, we had about $92 billion that's in that plan. 75% of that money didn't come from employee contributions, didn't come from employer contributions, but it came from return on investments. And so you put those three things together, and that's why you have us sitting at the place that we are right now. So I want to talk a little bit about, we've got employee trust funds. That's our sister agency. They're in charge of administering the benefits. They collect the contributions that your organizations send in every month. They keep the records on the benefits, and then they actually pay those benefits. And that's the job. When I was in North Carolina, I had the job of running what the comparable agency to employee trust funds is. And at SWIB, the investment board, what we do is we take that money and we invest the money. And in North Carolina, I used to say the investment folks made the money and we spent the money. Up here, the tables are turned. We make the money and Bob Conlon over at ETF spends the money. But it's a good partnership and we work well together. So, our job is to invest the money so that we can help ensure strong financial futures for our members. It's not the only thing that they should be relying on. Most of them have Social Security, and hopefully they've got some personal savings. It's the three-legged stool. But a big part of it is the pension plan, and that's our job, is help to make sure that that money is there. And I want to talk to you about how we and our trustees do that. We've got a board of trustees. There's 9 members. 7 of those are appointed by the governor. 2 of those are elected by the retirement boards. And you folks have a seat at the table, because one of those seats is dedicated to local government, and one of your own, Norm Cummings from Waukesha County, sits in that seat. And he does a great job in terms of representing local government interests, and he does a great job in terms of fulfilling his fiduciary responsibility, both as a member of the board and as chairman of our audit committee. So I'm thankful to have him in that role. So I want to talk to you about what we do, and I use this diagram to simplify it. We really do basically 3 things. We make money, we manage risk, and we control costs. And I want to talk with you today about all 3 of those. So as I alluded to earlier, you know that times are rough. But if you look back over the last 20 years, even despite the fact that the 2015 returns were basically flat, and we went through the 2008-2009 Great Recession, you still look at the return over the last 20 years, it's been 7.5%. The system assumes that we're going to earn 7.2%. So we've beat that over that 20-year period of time. But we're in a difficult environment, and a lot of economists indicate that the returns going forward for the next few years are going to be a lot like they have been in the last couple of years, a low return environment, not like it was in the 80s and the 90s. But let's just take a moment and go back and look at a little bit about how things have changed over the last 3 decades, because I think it helps create a little perspective both for your retirement system investments, but also for your personal investments if you have any of those. And I'll give you a little clue. We're not in Kansas anymore. So I start with this chart. If you ask me, say, well, what's happened over time? I start with this chart. And this is the 30-year history of performance with the Core Trust Fund. And we have 2 funds we manage. With the Core Trust Fund, everybody's in the Core Trust Fund. And then you can opt to be in the Variable Fund. And the Variable Fund is 100% stock, 70% domestic stock, 30% international stock. And people make a choice. You can pick to choose whether you want to go into the variable. But everybody's in the core fund for at least 50%. Most people are in for 100%. But some people choose to be 50% in the variable fund. So if you look at this chart, it gives a kind of a combination of how our core fund, trust fund performance compares to cash, treasuries, the Russell 3000 index, and that's just an index that's put together of the largest 3,000 companies that's incorporated in the United States. And the last group is the MSCI World Index, and that's just a global stock index. So it's a way to compare to how performance has been. The blue line that you see on the chart is the assumed rate of return. I mentioned that earlier. It's currently 7.2, but for many years it was 7.8%, but it's now at 7.2. And the red line assumes the 5% earnings. So when someone retires, money's transferred out of their account into their retiree account, and it assumes that it's going to earn 5% every year going forward. So that's kind of the base that we have. The whole count is 7.2, the assumptions, but the basic we have to really make in order to pay out increases is 5%. So you can see that over 3 decades, the core fund has returned roughly 9%. And that's pretty comparable to the stock market. And it's also above the system's assumed rate of 7.2%. So the key takeaway here is that performance is comparable to stocks with less risk, because risk is what's shown across the bottom, the amount of risk, and return is shown upon the right-hand side. So you can see return, and then you see the amount of risk that you take. So what we've been able to do is return just about over that 30-year period, about the same amount of return as we have, but also with less risk than you would have if you were in the stock market. Now, let's break it down by decade. Talk a little bit about what happened here. So this is 85 to 95. And if you look, you see the core fund returned 12%. And that's even better than the 30-year. That was a great time. 85 to 95, people were making money. It's slightly below stocks, but it's still considerably less than the risk than the stocks were taking. So, and look at what treasuries were paying back then. Not to mention cash. Cash was earning about 6%. Remember when people used to have passbook savings account and they had 5% earnings on them? Who wouldn't, you'd settle to have your money in a passbook savings account today, right? Yeah, well, just hang on. You're going to see some other changes here, too. So let's look ahead at the next decade. So now we're looking at that 10-year period from 95 to 2005. Returns are down across the board, but they're still very solid. The core fund return is down to about that 30-year level at 9%, and very close to the performance of both domestic and international stocks. But once again, less risk. And we'll look at the last decade, 2005 to 2015. You see that this includes the 2008 market downturn. You'll see in the Great Recession, the core fund only slightly trailed U.S. stocks, and it was ahead of world stocks. But look how the returns, especially the return on treasuries and cash, have dropped. I mean, cash is paying virtually nothing in this decade. And also, this comparable performance comes with significantly less risk because the core fund is a fully diversified fund. And that's one of the things I'll come back to in a minute, is the value of having diversification. So it's got increasingly more difficult to generate return as the last 3 decades have progressed. And that brings us to SWIB's second job, which is managing risk. Now, when I say risk, you know, what comes to your mind? Well, probably the first thing is you don't want a guy's talking to you about your investment accounts talking to you about risk. But the reality is risk is everywhere in the world. And let me give you an example. Let me just take a random example like driving in a snowstorm. And let's just say it's the first snowstorm of the year. Well, you know it's coming. You know you got to prepare for it. You got to get the right tires on your car. You probably need to get a shovel and a blanket, maybe some salt in the back. You got to be particularly careful because the other guys are they forgot. You know what? It's amazing what people forget in about a 9-month period of time. But that first snowstorm, people are they just got to get the feel for the car. So you're a little more careful. You might even change your route in order to get where you want to go where it was when it's snowing versus when it was dry. So you prepare for that, you plan for that, and then hopefully you get there as you plan to. Well, managing investments and financials is the same way. We have to plan for the risk. And I can tell you, after 2008, 2009, we and the rest of the world think about financial risk and investment risk very differently than we used to. No one would have conceived what occurred in 2008 and 2009 and the impact that it would have. And it's particularly important for the Wisconsin retirement system because our members, your employees, your retirees, share in that investment risk. And so what we've done is devise a strategy that helps us reduce that volatility in these volatile times, but at the same time generate enough money to keep the system funded at the level. So our job is to manage risk both in the short term and the long term. It's central to our work. And the primary tool is what I mentioned before, diversification. Now, most of our risk exposure comes from the stock market. People don't realize that, but 85% of our risk is the stock market. So what we've done is devise a strategy where we've reduced that risk, and the way we've done that is reduce the amount of money that we invest in the stock market. So we used to be at 56% of our assets were in there. We're down to 46% now. And we continue to diversify that, and we replace that with bonds, with real estate, with private equity, with hedge funds. Now, I've created this theoretical chart to give you some sense about how our strategy plays out. So the blue line is what might happen with the stock market. You notice it goes up, it goes down, and the dotted line is the theoretical SWIB performance. So when the market is raging and going really hot, we're not going to do as well because we're not as heavily invested in the stock market. But the theory is when the market takes a dip, we're not going to do as poorly as the stock market has done either. So it's reducing the volatility, reducing the risk that's in the systems. WRS returns rarely match the stock market returns. I get calls from people say, well, you know, the S&P 500, my money in the S&P 500 did a whole lot better in the stock market than yours did. Well, that's where the black line is below the blue. But then you'll see that when the market goes down, we also don't go as deep, and I'm going to give you an example of that in just a minute. So that's exactly what we want the strategy to do, to generate returns, but reduce the volatility in the system's annuity adjustments and keep the contribution rates as well as the annuity adjustments within a margin that we could find acceptable. You know, contribution rates have actually come down. You know, they've been going up for after 2008. They edged up a little bit to make up for some of the losses, but they've actually been coming down. And, you know, I think they're about a little bit less than 14% right now. And that's 7% for the employees, 7% for the employers. Now, I saw something the other day at New York was signaling about how things were going positive in their pension plan, that their contribution rate had dropped down below 20%. That was 20% for the employer contribution, not the total contribution. The total contribution in Wisconsin is 14%, a little less. 7% for the employer. The employer contribution had dropped below 20%. So we're really fortunate. There are some states that are a little lower, but by and large, most states have a much higher employer contribution than Wisconsin does. So the question is it working? And can we make the 7.2 over the long term? Let me take the first question, is it working? And then I'll come back and address the second one. So here's another way to take a look and to compare and to see whether the strategy's working. And this is on the left-hand side is what we call our policy benchmark. And that's what the trustees said is our asset allocation. And if you can see that little list on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's global bonds, there's high yield, there's emerging equity, all the different things that we invest in. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a column that's got two colors in it, and that's the reference portfolio. And that's intended to compare to see if you had a really simple investment portfolio. Generally, it's a 60% stocks, 40% bonds. How would you compare? And so that's one of the ways that we've looked at that. And what you see is that 60-40% that is over the last 20 years has generated about 5.8%. And as I told you earlier, the portfolio that we've put in place has generated 7.5% over that same period of time. So that's one way that we know that we're doing better by using that, and that's the strategy that we bring to that, and you can get through diversification, but also using skilled investment professionals. So last night, let me give you an example. I took a look at the returns so far this year. It wasn't a pretty picture. I can tell you that. And I looked at the S&P 500. It's only 1 month, but you can get a little sense about how this is going. So the S&P was down 4.96% as of last Friday. Did a little better, but it was struggling. And the preliminary returns for the WRS was down 2.76%. Now, I'm never happy with a negative return, but that's 40% better than the S&P 500. And that demonstrates exactly what our strategy is intended to do, is to prevent those deep dives that go down. Sometimes we don't make the peaks as well, but it's to kind of maintain some less volatility in the system. Now, the third part of this is controlling costs. You've heard the saying, a penny saved is a penny earned. Well, it works for us except in dollars and in millions of dollars. And every dollar that we save in terms of expenditures is just as good as a dollar that we earn in terms of our investment strategy. So we are considered by our consultants to be a low-cost investment manager. We invest in fewer high-cost assets such as private markets and hedge funds, and that generated a savings last year of $144 million for us. And as important as the types of assets that we choose is also how they're managed. And we currently manage a large percentage of our investments in-house. And we're able to do that for a quarter of the cost of what it would do if we hired external money managers. Right now we're managing 67%. In 2007, we were managing 21% in-house. Now we're managing 67% of that in-house. So by managing money internally and passively and negotiating lower external management fees, we generated an extra $63 million in savings. It's a combined savings of $207 million last year. But in order to do that, we need a highly skilled and talented, experienced investment staff. And in order to get, I tell you, Madison, Wisconsin is not the easiest place to recruit investment professionals to come to live, especially if you do your interviews this time of year. But it's also not the most difficult place. But you need to have competitive salaries. And people say to me all the time, I can't believe you pay those people that much money. Well, our trustees have set a peer group that's not based on the East Coast or the West Coast money managers, but it's based on what banks, insurance companies, and in-house investment shops in the Midwest pay. And their goal is just to go to the median, not to get to the top of that category, but get to the median of that category. So we pay competitive salaries. We have really challenging, interesting, professionally challenging work with the investment strategies we put in place. And the secret sauce, the third point is almost everybody we hire has some connection to the Midwest. They're either born here, they went to school here, they're married to somebody who was from here, and they choose to live for the quality of life in the Midwest. and we're able to attract people. Somebody who's an investment professional in New York City wants to make a job change, they don't look at what the want ads are in Madison, Wisconsin as a rule, unless they have that third piece and they understand the quality of life that we have in the state of Wisconsin. So we pay competitive salaries, we have good staff, and we are able to generate good results. And by doing that, over the last 5 years, we've added $1.4 billion to the WRS above what the market generated. That's through saving money, wise investment strategies, and our active management. And that's what you pay us to do, quite frankly. That's what you pay our staff to do, is to generate that type of return above what you could have gotten in the market. And it benefits the WRS, it benefits the 600,000 participants, it benefits the 1,400 employers that we've got. So as we move forward, you know, what I've talked to you about today, I've told you a little bit about the performance that we've had over the last 30 years relative to the markets, relative to our policy benchmark, and to a more typical 60-40 reference portfolio. But will it be enough going forward? Will we make the 7.2? And that's the second question that was on the slide earlier. We believe that we can do that. Economists are saying that we're in this low return environment. It's going to be difficult in the next couple of years, particularly. I mean, last year was tough. This year is shaping up to be tougher already. And we're a global investor. We have 50% of our stocks that we own are in international companies, not U.S. companies. Now, U.S. has done really well, but if you look at the stock market last year, there were about 15 or 20 companies that carried it. I got my personal investment statement yesterday. I was reading it last night. I didn't own those companies. But 15 or 20 companies carried the U.S. stock market last year, but it still was difficult. But we've got a strong economy in the United States. There's no doubt about it. It's probably the strongest economy in the world. But we also believe there's money and there's a lot of the gross national product around the world that's outside of the United States. So we're a global. We've gotten rid of our home bias, where you want to invest kind of where you live. Well, we believe that over time that'll pay off for us. But it's going to be difficult sledding as we go forward. And we believe that our asset allocation, the mix of assets that we've got, and the risk strategy we've put in place will work out. And it will treat us better and our members better than the other peer institutions that's going on out there. So we believe we've implemented an investment strategy that will protect the trust funds from the severe swings in annuity adjustments and contribution rates going forward, and keep us healthy, even in the rough seas that we're sailing in today. So I've put up some contact information. If you've got any follow-up questions for us, anything that you want, you got questions about how we invest, or now if it has to do with the pension benefit side, it needs to be directed to employee trust funds. But on the investment side, we're happy to take the questions. And I want to close with one story. I talked about sailing in some difficult seas. And so there's a ship, a warship out at sea, and the call comes down from the crow's nest. And he says, "Captain, there's an enemy ship on the horizon." So the captain turns to the first mate and he goes, "Mate, go to my cabin and bring my red shirt." He goes, "Captain, why do you want your red shirt?" He goes, "Because if I get wounded in battle and begin to bleed, the men will not see it and they'll continue to take the fight to the enemy." He said, "Oh, aye, aye, Captain." And he turns to walk away, and a call comes down from the crow's nest, and he says, "Captain, there's 5 enemy ships on the horizon." He says, "Mate, come back here." He said, "Bring my brown pants, too." Those up front will notice I'm wearing brown pants today. So I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have here before I turn it back over to Mark. All right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate you being customers of ours, and we appreciate you keeping sending that money down here to Madison. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the State of Wisconsin Investment Board, one of the actual real diamonds we have is the state of Wisconsin, and we are so fortunate that we have just a gem heading that up in Michael Williamson. We are very fortunate today to have a kind of a special presentation, a little outside the normal course of business for government and county officials, but nonetheless incredibly important part of our state. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to hear Mr. Peter Feigin, the president of the Milwaukee Bucks, speak to a small group of business officials, the Competitive Wisconsin Board of Directors. Following that presentation, I had a chance to chat with Mr. Feigin and thought it would be a good match to talk about how the Bucks situation evolved and what a great asset we have in the Milwaukee Bucks as a state of Wisconsin, not just Milwaukee, but as an entire state. He's an incredibly engaging individual. He's chosen to spend some time in Wisconsin heading up the Bucks, and we are very fortunate for that. Would you please join me in welcoming to the podium President of the Milwaukee Bucks organization, Mr. Peter Feigin.
Yes, I promise I will be different than talking about retirement funds and rate of return, although it all is the same thing. How do we get a rate of return of everything we do? What I like to do is start out with the sizzle. So I'm a sales and marketing guy. We'll start with a little sizzle reel, and then I'll kind of get into specifically how important this meeting is and how important the 72 counties of Wisconsin are to all of our growth, all of our economic development, and specifically to the city of Milwaukee and what the Bucks are doing. So let's roll the sizzle.
We talked about last season and understand that was last year. There's different expectations. We're a different team. That's why we play 82 games, is for us to find out what we are.
So the Bucks, what the hell does the Bucks have to do with the counties of Wisconsin? Well, a hell of a lot. I guess I spent about 80 days in Madison over the last 12 months preaching to the state choir with the overarching song of the state's largest city better be really healthy and great to make this a great state. And as you guys know, and as you're from other counties, there's this ridiculous disdain for Milwaukee from some legislators and counties, and there's not this overarching support of how do we reinvest and really make that city better. That's tough for us because that's kind of one of the overarching goals. The nice thing about where we were going and kind of the vision of this is we all live in a state where there are two unbelievable great examples of economic development that are led by sports franchises that have just done an unbelievable job in our baseball team and our football team, which you cannot tell us we've got over 3 million people coming to Miller Park a year for multi-day visits. We've got millions of people coming to Lambeau to just touch the ground, which is great. And you talk about how important that is and how important it is to have destinations and to have that catalyst for economic development. As silly as it sounds, you need that. You need people, you need tourism, you need jobs, and you need transactions to really do that. And the vision here for the Milwaukee Bucks is pretty simple. One side of it is we're planning to win an NBA championship. So you gotta, our owners are pretty simple. Like, they're in this game to win. They want to build a foundation. They want to build a great on-court competitive team to win a championship. And parallel with that, as the equal goal, is to be the best business we can possibly be in the world. And what does that mean? That means being profitable. That means having growth. And it also means being an unbelievable community partner in where we've been. And we've kind of taken what the Bucks were, which, for better or worse, was a distressed asset. You know, the NBA is by far the most international, diverse, growing league of professional sports. In cities, it usually is the life engine of what happens in sports entertainment. Not the case in Milwaukee over the last 10 years. But it had been, and it has an unbelievable legacy of winning championships and having great attendance and really being that driving force and really a pride of ownership, which we don't really talk about too much. And when you're looking for bipartisan approval and some public funding, you don't really talk about the heart and the brain and what that means for economic development. But I will tell you, as I have seen in this state, and I wear green too. I happen to be a Jets fan, so not different conferences, like never, you know, that I will tell you, when folks on Thursday put on their jerseys and watch the game on Sunday and probably don't take them off till Monday, there's something to be said about what that means for the passion that a sports team can bring. And the truth is, like, we think we can be greater than that. And you'll learn pretty quickly I'm a delusional optimist. So I think, you know, I think we can put Wisconsin on the map internationally like it's never been done before, because NBA basketball is an international sport. 50% of our traffic online comes from Asia. Some of our prospective naming rights and founding rights partners for this arena really care more about what their impressions are across the pond than they care about in domestic U.S., which is really a whole different world that we're dealing with than we were dealing with 10 years ago, which is incredible. But what we need to do, and what is really lead by example, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I was talking with one of your county executives, and we really look at ourselves as a conduit and a catalyst to really get people to start working together on topics that you can't even believe. Or if you asked me 5 years ago, I can't believe I'm involved in. I mean, what keeps me up at night? Work development keeps me up at night. Our education system keeps me up at night, because we don't have the foundation to actually fill jobs, you know, that we want to talk about employment. What keeps me up at night is how do we actually build this on time and in budget with an infrastructure that has a real tough time, and an education system that doesn't really have a work path development to skilled labor. We have like these core issues that you say this dumb team president, like I wanted to worry about selling seats and sponsorship. We're worried about filling jobs, which is like a real issue. We're worried about what curriculum is today and tomorrow to actually have people that are pipelined into the trades, and not just hard skills, soft skills, and not just for today and these 3 years, actually what's sustainable over time. And it doesn't just affect Milwaukee County. It affects the M7, which should be a big M and a big 7, and it affects the entire state. Because as we build an economic engine, as we build revenue and economic development in the core city of this state, the entire state prospers. You know, and I say that pretty simply, from tax revenue, from income tax revenue, from tourism, you name it. There's nothing that goes down when you start having successful sports entertainment venues. And the real differentiator here is we are building more than a sports venue. So sports venues have really been built on islands before. And I think you could see Lambeau is an interesting island that now is getting built around the island, but you cannot be successful in saying that you're going to transform any community unless you actually have people living and working there. And although everything has been about the arena, everything is really, the arena is just the catalyst to basically build a center of residential and commercial buildings to actually have people come back to downtown Milwaukee to live and to work over time. And that's very important. And you'll see as time passes, we will take more emphasis on moving companies, and not moving companies from out-of-state Wisconsin to Milwaukee. We are going to be a business development engine to bring companies that do not work in the state of Wisconsin to actually work into the state of Wisconsin. And that's kind of backwards in that a pro team really becomes a work development professional, an economic development professional, and do it. But we really see this opportunity. We're spending an exorbitant amount of time here with the state to kind of help us with a guiding hand, with the county, with the counties, and with the city of Milwaukee to kind of do this as well as we possibly can. I think we realize we're not going to change the world, but we're certainly going to spend the next 5 years in employing thousands of people and in building millions of square feet of livable and recreable places to do it the best we possibly can. It's an unbelievable opportunity. It's an opportunity that just doesn't exist ever. I'll tell you selfishly, as a professional opportunity, you can't ever find an executive job to run an NBA team, to reorganize a business, to transform a metropolitan downtown of a major U.S. city, and have owners who really have the vision way beyond like an arena and development to really become a growth engine of what we feel the state of Wisconsin really provides. The good news is we have no history and no real course of action and no skeletons in our closet, which I think helped us kind of get through the political process. The bad news is we're spending a lot of time learning, which is great, building equity, building trust, and I will tell you that I'm a fast-talking, semi-lazy language guy who is incredibly impulsive and likes to make decisions. Probably not the culture of Wisconsin necessarily to do it. We are a slow and steady burn. You know, I was laughing when he said you take out your passbooks and look at financial growth at 5% and do this. I'm very aware that as we build our season ticket base, every one of the season ticket holders actually look at their invoices in the state of Wisconsin. That's rare. That doesn't actually happen. And it also doesn't happen that the less fortunate economic fan to the most high net worth individual of fan actually calls you up directly to complain about your 1 or 3% increase in anything you do and understands the cost differentials of hot dogs in different pieces of the season. It's insane. It's insane. But I'm learning, and I'm building. We're spending a lot of time to set expectations in the bar where we can actually overachieve it, because one of the things when you don't have relationships and you don't have trust and you don't have the history, and this sounds really silly, but I was just telling my mom kind of what's so important, and I'm like, I would love to exaggerate everything in the world. I used to come home, from high school basketball games and tell my dad I scored 30 points, I had 40 assists, and probably had the triple-double in rebounds, and the score was somewhere in the 20s. So it was, it's been a real life lesson to really be kind of smart and conservative and really take this piece by piece and growing. And I will tell you on the county level, what's interesting is we're taking best practices. I mean, we're going to counties outside of Milwaukee County, upstate. We're taking advice of some of our friends to really learn best practices on work development. What's worked, what hasn't worked, how do we draw people? I will tell you that one of our goals, and I've caused a lot of havoc, and the head of tourism, I think, hates me for the state, but I think we're also in a place where, and again, it's a little bit cultural, where we have low self-esteem, and we don't think we're as great a state as we are, which is just incredible to me because I've been here for a year. It's just so inviting. It's an unbelievable way of life. It's a real opportunity, and it's different from a lot of other places. I went to school in Chicago for a couple of years, and we have this kind of ugly stepson, feeling to Chicago. I mean, we're better than Chicago. I mean, this is a great state, and I'm going to become, and our organization is going to become a real advocate for tourism and driving people here and not apologizing and actually being proactive and aggressive, which we're good at, to market the state. And you'll see that, and you'll see this in all your counties. We're spending money in 50 of the 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. And no offense to the other 22, but the population base is, I can't even find a way to spend money there. So if you can find it in your circulars or however we do it, I'm sure we could find it. But we're spending a lot of time of how we ingrain ourselves back into the fabric of Wisconsin. We're an NBA team. We've got great young kids. We're going to win an NBA championship. We're very excited to be a part of this, and we want to do it at such a high level. And we know it's going to take time. I spend a lot of time talking to people in Madison. I mean, we're not too far away. It took me 75 minutes to get here, and I was going pretty slow in an ice storm. Which, by the way, if you're driving tonight, good luck, because it's miserable. I think everybody here is used to. I'm still not used to watching cars like in the median. As you go 25 miles. It's kind of a bad sign. In other states, just so you know, people stop driving. When that happens, like. To get that done, they get nervous. I start sweating. It's terrible to get in. But I spend a lot of time in Madison. I spend time in Green Bay and Eau Claire, in the Dells, and I can't tell you how many people are basketball fans or sports fans and just tell me, you know what? I haven't been to a Bucks game in 10 years. I haven't watched a game. We kind of lost that connection. And part of our real mission is to reconnect, and it's part of the reason I do this. It's part of the reason we're trying for better coverage in media. It's why we're spending in counties. It's why we're doing community actions, because again, this is one big state, and I think when you talk about the Counties Association, you all get it. Like, this is how do we do best practices and how do we figure out to work as a group versus working as these independent silos around the state. And there are a lot of silos that we're trying to break down. And the Bucks are very excited to get this done. We are a mature startup company, and there's nothing cool. I didn't even know those existed before until somebody gave me the term. I was like, what better thing? I don't have to spend time in telling you what we do, what our brand is, what the product is. We get to rebuild it from the ground up into kind of its best case scenario, and that's what we're doing now. We're building it into its best case. This is an unbelievable, exciting time. I promise you team performance will get better. We're a young team. We've got a great starting squad. We need help in the second squad. If anybody's a basketball guy, I'll give you my last basketball comment. We've been killed by injuries, and we thought Vasquez was going to be healthy for the season. If you get that, we're on the same page for the season. But I will tell you, I spent it's a humbling experience to spend time with a lot of the leaders around the municipalities and around the country, counties, and even the business leaders. You are in a place that does not exist in real life, where people are so open, and whether they're from the public sector or the private sector, people stop what they're doing to help you and to really care about what's happening. And that's a big opportunity for all of us to work together. I mean, I can tell you, I think people are a little surprised that I aggressively, once they offer it, I take it. And I glue myself to people who I think are very smart and get it. I call myself a professional cut and paster. If you have a great idea that can help us, I'm going to steal it from you and take it and use it in the best model forward. So we're very excited. We've got a roadmap to really build a company, to build a culture, and to build a team that we're very, very excited about. This is I can't tell you how happy I am to get this group together. We are more than open for business and want to work with every county in a real direct way, on the community side, on the media buying side, and on the business development side in a big way. And the only thing prohibiting us from doing everything today is just time and people in a big way. But we will get there. We're getting there. We've physically been in 40 of the counties for a period of time, which in Wisconsin's a big deal. It's a big state with like some counties that are in the middle of nowhere. No offense to no offense taken. But I want to thank you, everybody in this room. My contact information is on the website. If you have not been to a Bucks game, you email me and be my guest to a Bucks game, because I promise you this experience is different and it's part of the culture we're building. I promise you that the experience is something great, and we're making it better every day. We're not at Miller Park. We're certainly not at Lambeau yet, but I tell you, we've got great avenues to aspire to, and we're going to get there in a big way. I promise the beer is cold, and the brats are warm, and the bathrooms are clean. And laugh it up. It's really important. It's really important to get it. But we want to see you. We want to be a huge part of this state, leverage the hell out of our team, because that's what we want, and we want to be a partner. We are the fabric of this state, and we're going to pound it in more and more as we get this going. So thank you very much. Go Bucks. I hope to get emails from a bunch of you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Feigin, president of the Bucks, and you're going to see more about the Milwaukee Bucks and Peter Feigin. We'll be doing a magazine piece on the Milwaukee Bucks and Peter and their experience in Wisconsin. It's really incredibly heartening to hear a man of Peter's stature talk about how he wants to come into this state and be part of the fabric of this state and be as big a team and partner in the community as the Packers and the Brewers. I think we are on the right track, and we've got the right guy heading up the Milwaukee Bucks. So, Peter, thank you very, very much. I can't remember the last time the Bucks won the championship. I'm not sure it was 71 or 72, right around there. I remember I was just a small boy, and I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and it was Lou Alcindor and Bobby Dandridge and Oscar Robertson. I remember that like it was yesterday. It was a great time. Okay, we've come to the part of the agenda where it's ask the attorney, ask the staff. So is Andy Phillips? Where's Andy? Come on up, Andy. The legislative team, our parliamentarian Mike Belaska, come on up. Be available. And then after the ask the attorney, ask the staff, we're going to have some giveaways and drawings, but you have to be present to win. So if you're going to head out for a little bit and go to the restroom, you want to come back, because right after that we'll take care of the drawings. So we have a couple of microphones that will be available throughout the room. So anyone with any question on any topic, for the attorney, for the staff, for anyone, that's a good idea to bring up the lights. Raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone out to you. Yeah, we'll just pass the microphone up here. Okay. So any question at all? Go ahead. We have okay, right back here. Yes.
Hi, Sharon Hampson, La Crosse County.
Yes.
I have a question about the 17-year-olds being placed back in the juvenile justice system.
Yes.
And my idea is a compromise for which I am not known, but in this case, I can see one. The Department of Corrections would save X amount of money by getting 17-year-olds out of their system. Why don't they take that much money and give it to the counties, and then the counties could match?
Kyle and Sarah, why don't they?
Okay. So if I understand your question, Sharon, correctly, it's why don't they take the money out of the DLC budget and place it into the juvenile, into the youth aids budget in essence? I think what the Department of Corrections would tell you is that, in essence, the population of 17-year-olds that we are talking about placing back in the juvenile justice system are not the 17-year-olds that we see in the state prison system today. So DLC would argue that there are no savings, that there is not any money available within the current system in order to transfer it from the adult side into the juvenile side. Because again, we're talking first-time nonviolent offenders who right now in the juvenile system may be getting probation at best, maybe a little slap on the wrist from the judge, and aren't receiving any sort of services in the adult system. Because they're not receiving services in the adult system, that's why they would say there's no funding available, and that's where our costs come in. Because in the juvenile system, we will work with the kid, the juvenile, we will work with their family and get to the core of what was causing that behavior so that they don't reoffend, and in the end, we'd be saving the state money.
One of the things, and we've offered a compromise on this piece of legislation. One of the issues related to the legislation is that, well, you county folks think it's going to cost 14, 15, 16 million. We at the state level, or proponents of having the counties take the 17-year-olds, think the number's a lot less. So if we allocate these funds to you, you're going to get more than you really need to take care of the issue. We've come up with a compromise. We've said this: let's put 14, 15, 16 million dollars in the Department of Corrections budget. And then when we have first-time offender nonviolent 17-year-olds, when we have them, then we will fill out the paperwork and get reimbursed for the actual costs. And if the proponents are correct, and it really is less than $15 million a year, that's fine. The state still has the money. They don't have to spend it. But if we're right, then the dollars have been allocated and counties are not disaffected financially with us taking on that population. So a compromise has been offered. To those that examine the issue and they hear our recommendation, nearly everyone says, well, that's a good idea. I mean, you're really getting the dollars from the state to the counties that have the issue, and if we don't have enough cost for that, money stays with the state. If we're going to solve the problem, it's a great solution. So we are interested in compromise, but compromise so that the counties are not disaffected. Another question? Yeah, another one? Okay.
Bill Clinton in Wood County. Yeah. This is dealing with highway safety. We just had another tragic accident with a buggy in central Wisconsin, and it's been a number of years since we put this through the legislature to come up with some kind of control on that, and I don't know how many people have to lose their lives or cause somebody to lose their life and ruin their lives for years. We've got to have something. We've got to have lights, things like that. When is that going to take place?
It's a very good point. There are safety issues, there are maintenance issues, there are creation of routes issues, but all of those issues cost money. I mean, to improve the safety of a roadway by maybe making the shoulder at the same level as the road, to put in rumble strips in the middle, to create lights or maybe roundabouts, or all of it costs money. And I'm not embarrassed or afraid to say this. We need more resources into our transportation infrastructure. It's just that simple. And I know some people are going to say, and they maybe even listeners or viewers on Wisconsin Eye, well, I don't want to pay any more money. Some things you simply have to pay for. It was mentioned earlier with our two-year colleges and extension. We keep talking about doing more with less. At a certain point in time, you're going to have to do less with less. Transportation's at that point. We don't have any money. We're going to do less with less. And if we want to do more, whether it's creation, maintenance, building, or safety, if we're going to do more, then we need more. We we have to look at the funding. This is an issue that the legislature and the governor really need to address. It's not just a safety issue. If we are going to succeed as a state, we need several things. We need smart talent. We need access to capital, and we need a good, strong infrastructure, both soft, like broadband, and hard, like transportation. But those things require investment. Not an expenditure, but an investment. And I think we have people in the legislature that want to do that. But we'll see. The problem is resources. When are we going to get to it? When we have more resources. Other questions? We have it over here. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. A couple questions for Sarah. Sarah, can you just go briefly back over the DHS? I wasn't catching all that. And second of all, which bill do you really think will move forward? I know you said a couple will, and I don't know if it's just price tags again, as Mark just mentioned.
I'm sorry, which bills?
Oh, sorry. Which bills do you think, I mean, I know you ran through them all, but really are going to probably get to the governor's desk?
Okay, was there a specific issue area in that?
Well,
or?
I was just, everything seems to still obviously have funding attached to it, and there seems to be obviously a fight about that. But I was just really wondering about if the mental health reform mainly in the sex trafficking.
Okay. The mental health reform bill, I think I have a lower level of confidence that the mental health reform bills will move forward simply because a number of those bills do not even have a Senate author. And because of that, once the Assembly goes home, it's unclear who in the Senate would be pushing to move those bills forward. So I have less confidence in the mental health reform bill. In the sex trafficking bill, I think Senate Bill 618 and 737 that would place children who are caught up in sex trafficking and place them in the child welfare system. Even though that has a price tag, I think that one has out of all three sex trafficking bills, that one has the best chance of passing. Oh, the other bills too? Oh, the 16515. Okay, that one. Yeah, I think the 16515 request will move forward. I don't think there's any question that there's the need for, the treatment to competency issue to be addressed. And from the county perspective, I definitely think it's something that would be a great interest to our sheriffs as well, because when these individuals are in our jails waiting to get moved to one of the state mental health institutes, we are paying for their stay, we are paying for all their medical costs, we are paying for any mental health treatment that they may need while they are in the jail. And so I think it is in our county's best interest to to be supportive of DHS in trying to expand capacity within their forensic units. There's a great benefit to us there. And I think, too, when I talk to our county human services folks on the electronic health records, it's really amazing that we're still operating institutions in the state of Wisconsin that don't have electronic health records. And again, when our counties are paying to send people there, we want to make sure they have the best information, the most up-to-date information, that all of the physicians and individuals that are treating those, the individuals that are placed in the mental health institutes are receiving the best of care. And when those individuals come back into the community, we need to make sure that, they're treating psychiatrists also have access to those records. So I think because they have some really, it's good policy, I think the Finance Committee will definitely move forward on these two issues. The question, I think, and the thing that we need to watch out for is how much additional revenue beyond the request gets taken to fund other pieces of legislation this session. That would, yeah, there's $33 million in the account now. After they have, they take the 16 million for this request, and then they have just over 7 million set aside for what they call their prudent reserve, which is 2 months of operating expenditures. There'll be $8.7 million left in that account. What we would like to do is see that move back to the counties. However, that's not part of the 16515 request. And so what we are trying to set the stage for a little bit is in the next state budget to find a way to get those dollars back to the counties for some form of community mental health treatment.
Other questions? Yes.
This morning, the panel discussed the workman's comp, and I wondered if anybody here today could address that. Nothing's been done with comp in Wisconsin for over 10 years. Thank you.
Yeah, the workers' comp bill has been a bill that's been in the works actually longer than 2 years. It does have a public hearing. There is an appetite to make significant changes to workers' comp in this legislative session. I think it's important to note, though, for over 100 years, changes to the state's workers' comp industry, workers' comp laws were made through the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council. Essentially, the council made up of equal representation of business and labor would come together and come up with a compromise bill. That bill would go to the legislature. The legislature would then pass that bill unamended. And I think the insurance industry feels like that process, while which oftentimes slow and maybe frustrating for all parties, is what's led to one of the most stable workers' comp markets in the entire country, right here in Wisconsin. This time, we haven't followed that process. 2 years ago was the first time, I believe, in decades where the legislature actually didn't pass a workers' comp bill. But again, there are changes that are coming and will likely be acted on by the legislature, but we haven't followed that process that we've traditionally used to make the changes.
Other questions? Now's the time to get free legal advice. Andy Phillips is right here.
My question is regarding the property rights bills that our legislature is working on this term. I'm from Polk County, which is part of northern Wisconsin. We have 413 lakes in our county. Our neighbor to the north, Burnett County, has 513 lakes. The lakes economy is incredibly important to our economy. We do not want polluted lakes. We want clean lakes. Yet, we have a legislator who is trying to destroy our lakes. How do we ever rescind the laws that he is creating through his legislation? Tomorrow there is a hearing on AB Bill, or Assembly Bill 600, and it has to do with dredging permits. It would allow up to 30 cubic yards per year per property owner to be dredged from the lake and under a low scrutiny general permit. Presently there is a permitting process that works where the individual gets a permit from the DNR. But what will happen? The lake that I'm a member of their management district, has over 600 lakeshore property owners. If one individual owner can do this dredging every year, think of all the damage they will be doing to our lakes. It will ruin a lake's food web, it will starve the fisheries, it will destroy native aquatic plant communities and invite invasive species of all kinds. And yet, what can we do? I have written to every legislator in our assembly and every legislator in our Senate, and I've not had a response. We have to stop these lake destroying bills, and how can we do it?
A couple of thoughts, and I understand your concerns, and we have been working. There's two bills that I think that you're referring to. There's AB 582, which relates to local government and sort of related to local government. There was some stuff in there in terms of divested rights, and then there was also AB 600, which you were referred to. That's mostly a DNR bill. Chapter 30 doesn't really affect counties so much, so we didn't have as much interest in that. When we lobby on these particular topics, we have to focus on stuff that is directly impacting counties, as we're the counties association. There are other groups, obviously, if there's an environmental issue, that will take on some of the aforementioned concerns that you addressed. But now, what happened, there were about 5 different items in AB 582 But I think the vested rights was basically the thing that upset local governments most, because what they did essentially in that bill was if you apply for a permit, let's say I go to Polk County and I put an application in for a permit, as soon as I do that, I have vested rights. That means the county cannot change its ordinances for me so long as I have my application in for the permit at the time that my application is in. What the bill did was, what it did is, let's say I was to apply for a permit for the state of Wisconsin, I would then also have my vested rights applied to the state, but also the county and the city and the town. And so we kind of thought that was overreaching. That was taken out of the bill, and there was other significant changes made. In fact, there were some things put in 582 for us that we are generally supportive of. So we were able to work with the bill author, Representative Jarko, to improve that bill and get us to a position of neutrality. But I do understand your concerns, and you talk about rescinding things that have been done, and I've had a lot of conversations about the shoreline zoning and Act 55 changes, and people have said, what can we do to unravel this, or what can we do to take this back? Got to keep in mind that this legislature voted to do that, and so a lot of them like what's been done. There are a lot of people who are happy with some of the changes that were made. So when you have people who like this sort of thing or are supportive, they're not likely to go back and say, whoa, well, hold on, we were wrong. We're going to take it back. They have a policy. They put it in the budget. They passed it. They like it. They're not changing their mind because a few people are unhappy about it. And that's part of the marketplace of ideas. That's where they are, and they were elected. And the only thing that's going to change, I think, is as new legislators come and go and different attitudes come and go from the Capitol, there'll be an opportunity to make changes to what was done this past budget. But I'll turn it over to Andy, too. He maybe has some thoughts on some of the land use issues.
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of thoughts, historical perspective is important here as well. Understand that this package, property rights legislation, has a lot of momentum because it started when our governor was running for president, and that was an important piece of what he viewed to be legislation that would support not only the broader good in Wisconsin, but the broader good nationwide. And so this legislation, as it relates to property rights, has been in the works for almost a year now. And so there was tremendous momentum, starting with administration all the way down through legislative leadership to get something done. I think the other challenge that we have is the changes to shoreline zoning apply in Waukesha County, which has lakes that are very well developed. Some would suggest overdeveloped, but have been for years, as much as they apply in Polk County. And so it's very difficult to have a piece of legislation that is one size fits all, when truly throughout the state we do not have one size fits all. And so one of the things that we've been talking about as well here, and believe me, there are more questions than there are answers about what is the extent of a county's regulatory authority when it comes to shoreline zoning, when it comes to subdivision regulation, when it comes to land use in general around the shoreland. And one of the things we've been discussing is trying to convene a group of people to talk about the extent of a county's authority, and also talk about what is it that we as counties can do to make sure that the interests of a county are protected. And one of the things, at least from our perspective, from the association's perspective, is that we don't want to see litigation and lawsuits, as much as it might help my bottom line. That really isn't what would be in the best interest of counties. We don't want to see litigation and lawsuits county by county by county. If we're all in this together, let's try to create some uniform understanding and uniform set of regulations that the counties association and all of us can get behind. So that's not really an answer on what can you do. It's saying we're going to continue to try to figure this out, and that's all we can do.
Over here. Yep.
Thank you, John. We are in Brown County, along with a number of other counties, have been experiencing a number of residents who have come into our Board of Health requesting that that our counties issue a statement that the wind turbines, the industrial wind turbines in our communities are causing a human health hazard. Recently, County Board Chairman Ron Hoyer and myself wrote a letter to the state requesting that the state legislature put money back into the budget to do a study. My main question really revolves around the fact that if, say, a number of boards, county boards such as Brown County or a couple other counties decide to rule that they're a human health hazard, what is your suggestion in terms of how we would approach that whether it's We Energies or Duke Energies. Secondly, the main question is, has WCA taken a position on wind turbines and whether or not the state should take a more proactive approach in terms of looking for the causal link between health impacts and the cause of wind turbines?
Well, there are a few parts to that question, Troy, and I think that we have to start with saying that this has been a topic of debate for the better part of, I would say, 10, 15 years now, when we saw I forget what it's called, the wind corridor that comes through northeast Wisconsin. And if you drive up Highway 41, you will see through Dodge County into Fond du Lac County all sorts of huge wind turbines that are there. As it relates to the regulation of wind turbines, you have to be careful, because then again you're dealing with certain property rights issues and you're dealing with certain statutes, and so it's going to be very important that, to the extent that the county takes a position of thou shalt not have any wind turbines, you got to be very careful about a position like that. I was asked a question at one point whether the Board of Health could declare wind turbines to be a health hazard and therefore ban them, and the Board of Health does not have that regulatory jurisdiction. I can tell you that any regulation related to that would have to come from the county board. So that's point number one. But point number two is, I can't tell you just off the top of my head what all of the issues are as it relates to somebody's right to place a wind turbine on their property, whether it be for commercial purposes or purely for their own personal purposes. But you're going to have to look at that. There are some significant legal questions there. And in terms of WCA's position, further study and things of that, I'll let Kyle answer that. It sounds as though there really isn't anything, so I will report that. Thank you. I'm doubling my bill for that, Mark.
On the wind turbine issue, if you recall back, I think it was 2009, there was a bill. Counties used to control the siting and used to be able to have their own ordinances in terms of how these structures were sited. And the state back then, and that was when the legislature was controlled by Democrats, they took that away from us, turned it over to the PSC. And so it just kind of goes to show that there always is a party for local control. It's a minority party. So we got to focus on, regardless of who's in the minority. And so we got to focus on trying to ensure that we have local control and stuff like that. I think that's where we're coming from. And I think one of the things we could do is encourage the legislature to give us that control back and take it from the PSC and make it a local issue.
That's actually what our letter really stated. It said that fund the study, and until the study's been funded, allow local control back for local siting rules. And so we're hoping that perhaps WCA can take a further look at that and help counties that are impacted by these issues better control.
Yeah, we'd be very supportive of that. And I didn't work here. I know Sarah did at the time that they went through, and I know I'm sure WCA at the time fought hard against that. But obviously, stuff that did happen, and we're going to go forward and try to get you your local control.
We're our friends from Calumet County. They went through a lot of this, and Alice can tell you all the years of studying and everything that went on with that. And Calumet County was integral when it came. They had a case that went all the way up, I think, to the Supreme Court as it related to windmill siting and various regulations. It led to the legislation that Dan was referencing. And so, again, we can't get into the details of it, but it is a significant legal issue when the county is going to take a stand saying we prohibit this. You have to be very careful about that. Alice, if you have something to add.
I think the other thing is when you're going to do a study of health effects, you don't have the Public Service Commission do it. You have an independent organization do it. And when you do a study like that, I think you have to look at areas before the turbines got in there and then after the turbines got in there, and then look at a lot of these side effects. We have them not in our county. We allow the very small turbines to be in the farmer's yard. They're the very small ones. But I know that it's going to come back. I just dread it because I think the whole thing when the Congress passed the credits, to come out, and they gave the farmers this money to put these turbines up. It was a great retirement tool, a great retirement tool. But I think there's a lot to be said about a study, but it depends upon who's going to do it and how they do it. There was a young woman in Brown County, I think she was only there very shortly, and she came in and said it was insignificant that they were a hazard. Well, I disagree with her, so, but we're going to see what happens with that case. Thank you.
We have additional follow-up here.
So one of the things that we are trying to do is to see if other counties would join us in sending a letter to the state legislature asking them to, approve some funding for the study. And so if anyone had any questions, Al Beekle, myself, Adam Payne, or counties that had sent in letters, and obviously Ron Hoyer from Kewaunee. So if anyone had any questions or wanted to see an example of the letter, we would be happy to show them that and encourage counties throughout the state of Wisconsin to support this endeavor. All right, thanks.
So, and let me just add to that, Troy, is that we will go back and we will dig up the information that we had related to when Calumet County was going through this issue, so you have some historical perspective from the last go-around with the legislature, and that way that can hopefully help inform what you're going to do going forward.
And for those of you who do not know, that was Troy Streckenbach, the Brown County executive. So if you are interested, Mr. Streckenbach will be around this evening. Feel free to talk with him this evening or contact him after the meeting. Other issues? Yeah.
With regard to repeal the personal property tax and the computer aids, when that first came out, there was a couple different issues. The repeal of the personal property tax, the way it would interplay with the levy freeze, is that would reduce your tax base. So it would basically shift the tax from business onto homeowners. And for Winnebago County, that'd be about $2 million. But the computer aids, if that was repealed, that would just be $500,000 lost revenue to our county. But the third area of real concern for me is that looking at our TIF districts, the personal property tax and computer aids revenues are concentrated in our TIF districts. And while they're not significant parts of our overall revenue or the revenue of the cities, they are about 1/3 of the cash flow into the TIF districts. And I think it would cause us to have to extend the life, and the cities, of course, with us, to extend the life of those TIF districts, or the TIF districts would go belly up. And is there any discussion of that shift onto residential, the loss of revenue, or the impact on TIF districts?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion, Mark. First, you're absolutely right. Repealing the personal property tax doesn't necessarily lead to a reduction in county revenues. It's just somebody else is going to pay us the tax money. It's going to be residential homeowners. The computer aid, though, which is just a straight aid payment that we receive, about $85 million a year, that would be a direct hit to us. And then you're right, the question that a lot of folks that are looking at this are grappling with is how do you deal with TIF districts? I know we have TIF districts in this state where 60% of the value is personal property. I mean, I don't think a TIF district could recover from that. So I don't know, how they ultimately deal with that. I can tell you from the association perspective, we're trying to kind of get out in front of this. We know the legislature has talked about repealing the personal property tax for 20, 30, 40 years. So it's only a matter of time till they do it. We have been involved in discussions with the business community. It's our understanding from those talks that they're not necessarily opposed to paying the tax or paying a fee. It's the paperwork and the administrative workload involved in filling out all the required information. So we've talked about maybe a fee in lieu of the personal property tax. I think the encouraging thing, Mark, is that the legislature and other stakeholders all realize they just can't get rid of it. They have to replace it with something because or else local governments are going to be hamstrung, and the TIF issue is a real problem.
I would add to that in our conversations, and Kyle and I have had extensive conversations with the business community representatives, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, as well as the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, to talk about tax policy and how it might work. The business community has, and Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce in particular, has been very forthcoming and very open and willing to coming to a solution to this personal property tax issue, which does not adversely affect the counties financially. They've been very good about that. In fact, if it happens, it will be because Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and counties were partners in this effort. So I'm not overly fearful that we're going to have some piece of legislation which simply disaffects us financially in a major way related to personal property tax. More likely, it will be an agreed upon solution that the parties come to it individually or jointly and then come to the legislature with a resolution. Now, absent that, there will be ideas, because at some point in time, we will not have a personal property tax in Wisconsin. I mean, we are moving down that road. So what is going to replace it and how? We have an awful lot to add to that, the richness of that conversation with some very important players that are very anxious to hold our hand and walk with us as we try to resolve this issue. So I'm really encouraged by how this is going to end up, although it's going to be it'll be an interesting path that we take, but I think we'll end up in a good spot. Yes?
I had a question on the UW extension proposal, and I guess the role of WCA in that. I guess I'm a little concerned that the process so far has not been a very strong partnership, since it relies a lot on the county to fund those positions in the program. And it seems to be a kind of a fast-moving train where they're taking the comments, but even on some of the questions, they already have the answers that, well, we addressed that, but we're going to keep on moving forward, and we need implementation to go forward. I guess my question is what is the role of WCA? Because you got invited to the table. I did talk with John. I'll be involved with that, at least trying to communicate it. But I mean, are we taking a position of we're supporting them and we're just trying to help them roll it out, or are we opposing this? I think the counties are all struggling and trying to even understand what's going on. But I know you guys got invited, so I'm kind of questioning the role that you're playing on our behalf in moving us forward, because I don't think we have commonality even in this room of what we think is good or bad with that proposal so far. So I'm wondering, how are you representing us at the table in moving us forward? I guess I'm uncomfortable with that.
Well, I think that whatever comes out of the extension modifications, not everyone's going to be happy. Although if we do nothing, not everyone's going to be happy. Not everyone's going to like everything that is proposed or offered with the extension reorganization. Where we play a role is in, number one, helping facilitate any comments, thoughts, suggestions that county officials may have and getting them into the hands of extension. And it's been a relatively long process up to this point. It may seem like it's moving along rather rapidly, but there's an awful lot of opportunity to modify the process. We've been invited to participate in the steering committee through Mr. Holcomer. And John, where are you located? John may have something to add to this conversation as well. But our role, it's not in support and we're on board and this is what ought to happen. And it's not we're opposed to it, it shouldn't happen. It is we have a challenge in a budget cut that was imposed on higher education in this state. The university system took a major portion of that cut. Extension and two-year colleges took a portion of that cut. Extension has to do something. What is that something? Well, it is something that not all of us are going to like, especially initially. But we do want extension to have all the possible thoughts, knowledge, ideas before they go forward. And that's been our role up to this point. Later, when the decisions are made, then our role will be helping to implement them so it disaffects the most counties in the least way. That will be our role. John, you have something to add to that?
I would just add that Mark is correct. WCA was invited to participate on the steering committee. I would strongly encourage you that if you have written documentation, and many of the counties have already submitted information to UW Extension, please forward that information to me. The main purpose for me sitting on that goal on the steering committee is to make sure that all the concerns of each county are heard. So I want to make sure that WCA has those communications from the counties. And again, a number of the counties have submitted them to me. The steering committee, the first meeting of the steering committee will occur in the next few days. So the sooner you can get us that information, the better. And as Mark indicated, not everyone's going to be happy, and changes will be coming. But the purpose for me serving on that committee is to make sure that all of your concerns can be heard. And I've had requests regarding the makeup of the committee, how that was decided. That was not a WCA function. That was a UW Extension function. I've heard concerns from rural counties I've heard concerns from more urban counties. So please, if you have concerns, make sure that you get them to me in writing if possible, and the sooner the better.
I can add, though, that in talking with Kathy Sandine, the decisions are definitely not made. So I would really strongly encourage you, either through John or directly to the Chancellor's office, let her know your thoughts. It's still under consideration. It's not in stone. So I'd encourage you to participate in any way you're comfortable, whether it's writing a letter or calling her up and talking directly, or if you can't get a hold of Kathy Sandine, talk to Rick Clemmy and tell him what your thoughts are, what your concerns are, or what you think might happen if they move in a particular direction. Please let them know. I know that the decisions have not been made. Yeah.
Mark, going along with the extension, we would be in 5 counties together. What we're putting into extension, one county's putting in 204,000, we put in 101. One county puts in 75. How is that going to be equalized?
Yeah, that is definitely an issue they've been grappling with. I just spent an hour with Rick Clemmy talking about that very issue, how they're going to balance that. They're grappling with it. I do not have an answer, nor does Extension, but they are most definitely aware of that challenge. Something will be coming forward, but I quite honestly I can't give you any information on it because I don't have any, but I can tell you they are aware of that challenge. Other questions, thoughts, issues, comments?
Andy, it's I guess it's kind of our belief that the zoning laws apply to counties but not municipalities. The question is, could a township that has adopted county zoning enforce those?
Can a town that's adopted county zoning enforce the zoning code? I think it can, but it's the county zoning code, and so it would have to be by delegation of the county and have the town as the enforcing agent. I mean, I guess from my standpoint, I don't know if anybody up here has any other thoughts or anybody in the room, but I would want some uniformity in the application of those laws, so I'd be concerned about the enforcement of the zoning code town by town by town if it's the county code. That would be my concern, is the uniformity in the application and enforcement of those regulations. But there's nothing that says that you couldn't delegate that.
Other issues?
I want to expound on my partner's question there.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the townships, particularly ours, the town of Oakland and Inverness County, designated our zoning to the county. And my question is, do we still retain those zoning rights in the township? That's a very good question raised, and nobody's been able to answer that for us.
So you had town zoning, but you gave up town zoning in favor of county zoning?
Yes, we turned the township zoning over to the county.
So you have county zoning.
Administrators, so we had county zoning. And I'm wondering if that would revert back to the township. Thank you.
There's a statutory process that talks to making a town able to exercise village powers, at which point it can adopt its own zoning ordinance. That's the process it would go through for a town to then exercise its own zoning authority. But if it hasn't done that, if it's approved the county zoning ordinance, it's under county zoning. I guess is the way to look at it. It's in 59.69 of the statutes, and there is a process laid out in there.
Yeah, and also I would concur with Andy. I would also say anytime that your county does a comprehensive rewrite of the zoning code, then you obviously would have the option of pulling out of county zoning. But if you're in county zoning, if the town makes the choice that they're going to join, at the time that the county does its comprehensive rewrite, join the county zoning process, then you are subject to county zoning.
Other issues? Yeah, right over here. John, okay, right over here.
Mark, I'd like to address this question to you as well as our NACO representative in the room. You read a statement this morning and you said power to the states, focus on issues which lend themselves to centralized power and public-private partnerships, talking about the potential reduction or the movement of power to the states. it sounds like you might have some specific ideas or directions that we should be exploring, and I'm wondering if that's something that you or our NACO rep might have some ideas about that we should start thinking about.
Well, number one, Deborah and I did not collaborate on my presentation at all, and I have no inside information as to what the federal government might do. The statement I made in regard to what a redefining of the role of federal government might look like would be, if it were to occur, it might look like a devolution of power from the federal government to the states, while the federal government maintains those issues that lend themselves to centralization. And if that were the case, then a federal budget, as a percentage of GDP, might be reduced, and we might make headway toward reducing the national debt. I could see an environment, and I think that there are some trends that lend us to give that kind of thinking credibility. And then later, the public-private partnership, which would be partnerships with the public sector with the private sector in delivery of services and or products, mostly services at the government level, would be part of that. Now, there's a lot of data which would suggest that we're certainly moving in that direction. Contracts from the public sector to the private sector for performance of public activity, it's been going on for many, many years, but it is becoming more widespread in more areas. And if that's the case, you might almost say it's an organic change of a redefining of the federal government role. Now, I would also suggest, though, that if we are going to have a major redefining, it is not as likely that it come up organically from the ground up, but more likely that it come from the top down in response to mass frustration and perception of dysfunction at the federal level. That's what I would suggest. I'm suggesting that this fourth redefinition of the role of the federal government, that might be the catalyst which would make that occur. And I'm not sure, Deborah, if you have anything to add to that? No? Okay. But you can certainly, Mark, I'd certainly suggest you can speak with Deborah or I during the reception, and we can expound and on end with that. I mean, the beauty of that kind of thinking, it's like a weatherman or an economist. I really don't have to be right. It's just some thoughts. So that's kind of the beauty of it. Yeah, over here.
I'm Mary Kohler. I'm a Dane County supervisor, and I'm on the Dane County Zoning and Land Regulation Committee, so I appreciate the questions that are being asked about zoning and the relationship between the county and the towns. I have been to the Capitol numerous times to speak in opposition to the legislation that was on the list today of pending legislation. The legislation that is written about towns being able to opt out of county zoning is written such that it says it only applies to counties with more than 485,000 people, and Milwaukee County doesn't have towns. So that's why it applies to Dane County only, but I'm very pleased that Wisconsin Counties Association has been there also speaking in opposition, but I wanted particularly those who are asking questions about zoning to know that when we spoke in front of the committee that Senator Lacey chaired, he specifically said he would like this legislation to apply to the entire state. So I don't know if you want to add to that, county staff, please, or association staff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. As I think was mentioned earlier, we have had bills over the past few sessions that would have allowed towns to unilaterally withdraw from county zoning. Those bills never gained much traction, and the current bill draft that we're dealing with only affects ultimately Dane County. And I think Mary's exactly right. One of the reasons that this should be concerning to everybody in this room is that while this is only Dane County, the kind of the slippery slope argument. Undoubtedly, we will have towns in other areas of the state where if this bill is passed, they will say, well, if it's good enough for Dane County, why isn't it good enough for whatever county? Use Marathon as an example. Kurt. If it's good enough for Dane County, why isn't it good enough for Marathon County? Again, and we see this a lot with legislation. It may be very narrowly tailored right away, where it only affects a handful of individuals or a few counties, but ultimately it leads us down that slippery slope. I can tell you the Wisconsin Towns Association, a priority of theirs is to have this expanded to all 72 counties. So anything, I think we would encourage everybody in this room, anything you can do to help assist your partners in Dane County in this effort to try to stave off this preemption of county authority would behoove not only you personally but also the association.
Let me just add to that too, is that part of it, what you see too in the legislature with the property rights package, is that you see the realtors and others coming out in opposition to an expansion of a town's authority to zone or regulate. And so you have what's really fascinating is you have a set of bills saying towns have greater authority, then you have a set of bills saying towns have less authority, and how you reconcile those is beyond me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in regards to the legislative leadership roundtable this morning and the conversation about roads and infrastructure and funding that going forward, does WCA have a position on ideas or concepts that are best to do that? The 0.5% tax here is obviously on the table, but there's skepticism, at least from me, that could be negative going forward to the counties because that could give the legislatures the opportunity to take some funding away possibly if this tax is implemented. So is there any ideas on that from you guys?
We have been in favor, and Dan can speak this as well, but we have been in favor of virtually any and every mechanism to raise dollars in transportation. Everyone. Gas tax, great. Vehicle miles traveled, we're in. Tolling, yes. Modification of the registration fee by value of the vehicle, yes. Half-cent sales at the county level, yes. Half-cent sales tax or any percentage of sales tax at the state increase, yes. We've been in favor of all of them. Is any one going to gain traction over the other? Quite frankly, I mean, we're a little off when it comes to comparison to other states in our mix of revenue transportation. If we're going to have substantial dollars into transportation, it is likely going to occur with several different areas. You might say, if like a good friend of mine from labor of years ago said, if there's going to be blood, make everyone bleed, and that way no one's looking at someone as a winner. That might be the case with transportation. You have everyone participating in some part of the revenue stream, or every entity that has an interest participating in the revenue stream. That might be the case, but the slide you saw earlier today with the Representative Dean Knutson piece of legislation, which would have been optional local county a county half-cent sales tax with referenda. That one we supported, although it was kind of a narrow stream. If it were to pass and be signed into law, it would provide substantial revenues, not just for the county, but for the cities, villages, and towns within that county as well. It would really go a long way, or at least, I guess, a long way in a constricted time period. It's a 4-year time limit on the referenda. To providing sufficient revenues or some revenues to transportation.
And I think you hit on a critical point, and something that we were a little concerned about as we started these negotiations was that if we're given this authority, does that mean the state legislature is going to cut our funding in other ways and shift that to other parts? And I can tell you, not only did we get commitments from the bill authors and supporters that would not happen, but we also received commitments from legislative leadership, because we said, look, if we're trading one thing for another, we're not interested. But if we're talking about this, in addition to the state maintaining its transportation funding commitment to local government, then we're definitely interested.
I guess that was my major point that I'm worried about, is the fear, not so much at the county level, although that's a concern, but at the village or town level, which I was also a part of, that those road aids would be taken away. And I think that's something that needs to be in the bargaining when it happens.
Yeah, and that was kind of the line in the sand that all the municipal groups drew, was that this will not result in a reduction in other transportation aids.
I'd also add that when we talk about transportation, it doesn't do really any good to have one of the transportation interested groups, one of those silos, get dollars and no one else. That really doesn't work. Whether it's private sector or whether, let's say, it's just towns, that's not a winner. If we're going to have revenue, it needs to be revenue for all parties involved, because it's all part of the same network. It's all part of the same infrastructure. So that's with the half-cent Dean Knutson bill. That half-cent would have been divided between cities, towns, villages, and counties. All of us would have been of great help. If we're going to have a revenue stream at the state level, it will be for all the interested parties. And we have that commitment even from the private sector. The Transportation Builders Association. That group has indicated we're with you in the public sector. We need to all participate in a revenue stream, so we're on board. I would say that the Transportation Coalition that's been developed with the Transportation Builders Association, the Counties Association, and various other groups has been a very strong coalition. We don't always agree on every issue, but on this issue of additional resources, we have been holding hands and getting along quite well. And I think if we're going to be successful, it will be because of that partnership and coalition. Yeah.
County jails and criminal justice are obviously one of the largest expenditure areas for counties. Over the past several years, WCA has supported the state's direction to expand the TAD program, the Treatment Alternatives and Diversions. We haven't heard a whole lot about it this year because I think that expansion is in place. I'm just wondering if there's any planning or any thoughts on next steps, new directions for that kind of next step to TAD or enhancement of TAD that you've heard from counties.
Sarah, Kyle, who's going to take that?
Yeah, there's a Fitzgerald-Nygren bill that's working their way through the legislature right now that we think is going to add another $2 million into the TAD program. And it's something that I know the Department of Justice has been working on with those two legislators, and they've talked to me about it to try to make sure that we recognize it was out there and to be supportive of it because, of course, it's late in the session and they want to make sure that this bill passes. And so there is, at the state level, definitely an effort right now to try to get $2 million to expand TAD to additional counties in Wisconsin.
Other issues? Yep. Mr. Executive?
Well, when we're...
You're on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we're talking about mental health and TAD, these are all great programs that the county is, Brown County is certainly, slowly but surely getting more involved in these type of things. The biggest thing, and I think we heard it earlier regarding with the legislative update in terms of some of the mental health reforms. One of the big things that we hear is that about 2/3 of our jail is currently made up of individuals who have mental health issues. And as we continue to look at our diversion and treatment, one of the biggest things that's lacking and one of the things that's going to make it very difficult for counties to afford is really the funding for these type of mechanisms. So I'm hoping that as time moves on and we look at the positive outcomes, that we look at DOC, we look at certain funding from DHS to help counties offset those expenses, because right now it's going to be difficult for counties to maintain levy limits, the tax rate, and potentially the funding shared revenue. If they're expecting $100 million in this next biennium budget, that might need to be cut. We're going to have to find a place for these people to go, and right now that affordable treatment is just not available. So hopefully as a counties association and counties, as we tackle this issue, we can continue to look for funding sources.
Point well taken.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd mention as well, since Deborah's sitting here, is NACO does have a Stepping Up initiative as well, which deals specifically with assisting counties in working with individuals with mental illness within the jails to try to get them out of the jails and attach them to treatment within the community. There's a toolkit that's available on the NACO website as well that in essence lays out how it is that a county can get started with the Stepping Up initiative. There's a summit that I think is occurring, I don't recall when, I think in the next few months that NACO is sponsoring on the Stepping Up initiative, although applications for that were already due, but because of the great response to that, NACO is anticipating doing another Stepping Up summit next year as well. So it's something I highly encourage all counties to take a look at, is just go to the NACO website. They're partnering with a number of organizations at the federal level. Take a look at that and see what is available now and in the to at least get you started. And then in the meantime, we absolutely recognize, Troy, you're right, that we do need to do something within the state of Wisconsin to try to, you know, in the best way we can, remove individuals with mental health issues from our jails, because that's not the place where they're going to receive treatment or the best treatment. That's not going to help them. And really try to work on some community alternatives to that, and funding and resources, including having mental health providers available in the state. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we're going to be facing.
Yes.
Mark? Mark?
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for getting the opportunity to hearing the president of the Bucks speak to us today. I thought he did a great job, and I'm always quite sports-minded, as you know. And I talked to him after for a few minutes, and I told him he was very fortunate, too, to be talking to this group of great county leaders all in one room. And I feel everybody in here is a great county leader and has done a great job in their counties, and I wanted him to know that, too, that he was fortunate to be hearing everybody that we have here in this room. And like I said, it was good to talk to him, and I thought it helped us. I know he wanted to talk to the county leaders. Well, we had them all here in one room today, so I think that worked out well.
I think a very good point, Lee. And I'll tell you, if when the president of the Milwaukee Bucks organization invites you to a Bucks game, I would take him up on it. So send him an email. He's serious about that. You can tell. I mean, he had no notes, by the way, when he was talking. I'm not sure if you could tell that, but he's serious about that offer. So please take him up on it. He wants to make the Bucks Wisconsin's team, not just Milwaukee's team. Yes.
One of the issues with mental health in jails is we can do some things with our own inmates, but there's a lot of probation holds that also have mental health problems, and that's sort of outside of what we can do. And is there any effort at the state level to provide those kinds of mental health services for probation holds and being able to get some of those people out of our county jails?
Sarah?
I think you identify an issue that the DOC recognizes, and I think DOC has some of the same problems that our county human services departments do with regard to finding resources available in which to serve individuals that have mental health needs across the state. I know when individuals in probation and parole are in our jails and they have significant mental health issues, and we have to provide the medical treatment for them, it's extremely expensive. I think we also know that you know, an individual with a mental health issue in the jail can at times be disruptive because the environment is not conducive to the individual who has that mental health need. And I think DOC will tell you that probation and parole agents would like to have more resources available to them to provide necessary services and treatment to individuals who are on probation and parole, and the resources just currently are not there. But I think it's definitely something that we will need to partner with DOC on and have conversations with DOC on moving forward, because I think it's a shared issue with DOC, and to see if there is some way that we can work together, hopefully within the next budget, to see if we can identify some resources to help both the counties and the state with that population.
I have a question. Oops, I'm sorry. The question I have is, we've been talking about a number of things here as county leaders and that are somewhat systematic, but the other piece to this, and partly with the NACO rep and state, is workforce development. And the president just released quite a bit of money to go out for K-12 education and beyond to get us up to speed finally after 20 years of falling behind in terms of coding and other challenges. What are we going to do as counties to some of that money, because workforce development vexes all of us in different ways. Peter talked about it, what's happening in Milwaukee. In Waukesha County, I can tell you our biggest economic development impediment is we're concerned, I know it sounds ridiculous, but with 400,000 people, we don't have enough people just to fill the training, much less the jobs. And yet everything is going technical, and this money now is being available, and it affects us as county government, it affects our public safety, it affects us in a lot of ways. How can we get involved in that to make sure that that money flows correctly, and has the biggest impact as quickly as possible?
Well, let's see. Kyle, it seems like a question for you.
Give me more time. No, I think, in all honestly, Paul, I think that, and you guys are kind of at the forefront of it in Waukesha, but you have to have relationships between local government and the business community, because the business community is ultimately going to drive workforce development. It's not going to be the legislature just doing it or Congress just doing it. It's going to be a demand from the business community. So I think that relationship is really important. And I think to highlight your point, counties are not going to see a whole lot of new money coming out of Madison or Washington, D.C. It's just the fiscal reality of the nation and the state. So if we don't do things to encourage economic development and in turn workforce development, we're not going to be able to survive. So again, I think it's very important that we don't have these two kind of separate blocks where we have the business community over here and local government over here. They have to be communicating, and you have to build those relationships locally.
It's not a direct answer, Paul, but I think one of the things we can do. Competitive Wisconsin Incorporated, the entity that encompasses trying to make Wisconsin a more competitive place for the future and create a more attractive environment where more people are making more money, engaged in more commerce within this state and within our borders. That effort and the 3 Be Bold efforts that Competitive Wisconsin has engaged in attempt to address that issue. We need more talent in this state to support an aging population that's going to be around for a lot longer than the demographic tables tell us we're going to be around. My generation, baby boomers, we're going to be around a long time. We need a lot more millennials and Generation Z folks making a lot of money engaged in commerce, but they need to be trained to fill those positions that our generation is leaving vacant. And Competitive Wisconsin is looking at that. One of the Be Bold efforts looks at that very issue. If you'd like to participate in some way, I would encourage you to contact Competitive Wisconsin. You can, and we'll provide you the contact information, but contact Competitive Wisconsin. There's lots of opportunity to participate in steering committees and Be Bold efforts in participating with ideas and thoughts as to how we might tackle this challenge. I'd also add, we're not alone in this. And the whole nation, in fact, in parts of the world, are with us on this challenge. We're getting old really quick here in Wisconsin, in the United States, and in other countries. We have to address it. It's the thing that I spoke of earlier, referenced earlier with Social Security. We knew we were getting old. We knew we would be around a long time. We knew we would need resources to fund Social Security, but we haven't really done much about it. Here we have a chance to do something about it by training the next generation of wealth makers to fill the positions that the boomers are leaving vacant. We have that opportunity. If we do it smart, we can actually make progress. If we do it smarter than everyone else in the country, we have a chance to get ahead. That's part of what the Be Bold effort in Competitive Wisconsin is trying to address. Yes, Deborah.
Hi, yes. If I could just add from the federal level, as I mentioned in my presentation, last year Congress passed a pretty comprehensive Workforce Innovation Act piece of legislation that would update the whole workforce system. And there was really a concerted effort by the states and the governors to really take away a lot of the local control and local decision-making process and some of the budgetary finance issues from the local workforce investment boards. But I think at this point, some of the ways that counties and you all as individuals can get involved are over the next few months, the U.S. Department of Labor is going to start developing a lot of rules, new rules to go with that legislation and to begin implementing it. So as we see those rules start to come out, it'll be really critical that counties start to do public comments on those one way or the other. We will work with your state association to let you know when some of those rules are coming down the pipeline. And also, if they start to develop rules that are not friendly to us as counties. I think that we can really work with Congress to put pressure on the agency to at least hear us have a seat at the table in some of these ongoing discussions about the process and funding streams.
And the challenge that we have as counties, and I'm not talking just myself, we look at all 72 counties. Now that we can have jobs where you can telecommute in, you don't have to live in an area. But we're losing a lot of talent, not because of weather. We're losing it to Minneapolis or Chicago. We have to look at that as an association, as a competitive Wisconsin, and say, what can we do about it? Knowing there's money out there, but I think we as leaders all have to be involved in it. And I appreciate what you're saying, but we have to realize that all of a sudden you lose local control, and your ability to help mold your workforce for what you need to take care, especially in health care and some of the other issues, could be very detrimental to our long-term existence, really, as you know, as these jobs are not fulfilled or not educated to, because I look at the automation going on in factories and everything else, and we are quickly, if we don't get those jobs filled, we're going to have challenges.
Well, I think you are so much on the right page. It's really, you're so right. If we want to attract that smart young talent, we need to look at what that smart young talent is interested in. And clearly we have to have positions, and we have to be able to train these young people to take those positions. But we also have to make ourselves attractive so that smart young talent wants to be here. And you're right, it isn't weather. Clearly, it's not weather that people are after when they come to Wisconsin. We have a quality of life that is really special. But we also have to provide the kinds of amenities that the smart young talent, the next generation of wealth makers, desires and wants. And that's, if we look at the list, 80% of what that smart young talent want, the ones that have to make a lot of money and support all of us that will be retiring, that list, 80% is funded by government. We need to invest in our communities, in our counties, make them attractive to that smart young talent. I mean, what does that mean in real words? Broadband everywhere, continuing education, not even for a degree, ability to move around your communities without the use of an automobile, recreation opportunities. It means those kinds of things. It's not better or worse than what we had previously when I was growing up as a young person. It's just different. And whoever taps into that difference and creates a community that's attractive to that smart young talent is going to draw that young talent in and position themselves for success. I think you're exactly right on
If
that.
I can say something to that, Mark, and that's some of the work I do, I work with some of that young talent, and one of the things that they're very sick and tired of, and they are adamant about this, and this is millennials, is they're sick of our fights. They don't see the same boundaries that we do. And Peter said it when he talked about it. He gets sick literally because he sees we have such a great state, and yet, you know, a big part of the state just disdains Milwaukee or throws it down. It's racially motivated. We got to be honest about this. We've got to get over that because young people are not tolerant of that. And our animosity, our prejudices, whatever you want to call it, we've got to get over that to make the state a great place to live and work. And that's all of us combining together rather than fighting each other. That's what the Counties Association is meant to do for us and with us, and NACO is meant to do for us nationally, is realize we're all in this together. And the more that we can help our workforce development, our schools, and our communities combine better, that's up to all of us to be able to do that.
I am very, very proud of county government, people in this room, and your colleagues around the state. We have talked about this issue for years and years. Every study that looks at the issue tells us, as goes the economy of the major metropolitan area of a state, so goes the state's economy. And in our case, that is Milwaukee. So regardless of where we live, Cassville, Marinette, Superior, Stevens Point, or Kenosha, we have to care about the success of Milwaukee. We have to. We've talked about this years and years. And what I'm so proud of is that the people in this room and county government throughout the state of Wisconsin absolutely gets that. Absolutely. And if we're going to succeed, we all do have to get it. That means we need a successful Milwaukee public school system. That means we need a successful entertainment district in Milwaukee Bucks. That means we need a successful feeder institution and higher education institution which can educate people and create the amenities so they want to stay here. That means all of that. So we've talked, and I don't mean to digress into last year's conversation that we had together, but That's really what we're talking about. Yes, over here.
Mark, I just wanted to add, and we do have a question here too, just in some of the conversations that we're having as we travel the state, we're talking not only to local units of government, but we're talking to business as well. So some of the issues that Chairman Decker is mentioning, some of those issues are consistent around the state. Some of them are very unique in different parts of the state. For example, some work that we're doing in the Viroqua and Westby area, they are really struggling. Their number one issue is the availability of certified daycare. Child daycare. So young women, in most cases, it's young women that are leaving their jobs because they have to stay home and take care of their kids because there's not the availability of certified daycare there. So they're dealing with that issue. They're dealing with adult daycare as well. And housing is a major issue around the state that we're hearing all over as far as the younger generation and the type of housing that they're looking at. So it's all things that we're hearing about. It's all things that we're listening to and that we're sharing with anyone who's interested to hear what we believe are some of the future challenges that we have. We have a question here.
Yeah, Bill? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, then we'll go to you, Bill.
Actually, just a comment on the Brown County Executive's problem as far as corrections is concerned. I'm a Green Lake County Register, was in corrections for 27 years. And long story short, what we did in Green Lake County, and Mark talked about this and Sarah's talking about it, we're talking about how to deal with mental health. That's an issue in and of itself, and it's very complex and diverse. But you have to look at what you can do. And what we did in Green Lake County was we created a pilot program between myself and Judge McMonagle, and we diverted inmates through a community service program and also through an electronic monitoring program. Long story short, we didn't have jail space. We had 80 inmates. We needed to divert the people. So of those inmates, 20 of them, I got involved with programming. So for every 24 hours they worked in the community, they got a day off their jail sentence. We talk about $40 a day. Really, the costs are close to $52 a day. So that equated to, if I got one inmate diverted for 365 days of work in the community, that was over $20,000. I had them working at the local cities, counties, picking up garbage, helping with the city crews, etc. The unintended consequence of what happened was we actually got them to have a work ethic and pride in themselves, and then when they were going to come back into the system, they actually didn't because they actually got the job skills and the things that they needed. Through the electronic monitoring program, real quickly, what we did was with OWI's second, thirds, and fourths, we again addressed drugs and alcohol, what we could do, and we diverted them on electronic monitoring. I had close contact with them and actually did rounds and checked on them on a daily basis. That was my job. Long story short, in Green Lake County, in 5 years with my programming, we saved over $300,000, and we did a tremendous amount, and we also, as I said, had the unintended consequence of not having the repeat offender come in, which was even more savings. So that's just an example of what you can do, and then looking at, instead of looking for the state and national help, how you can help yourself as the county.
Thank you. Dick.
Dick Keppen, Waupaca County Board Chair. Just to get our mind off of county business here just a short time, I have to really mirror Mr. Reimer's comment about the Milwaukee Bucks being here today. That was really so interesting because where we come from, up in Waupaca County and north central Wisconsin, we don't hear a lot about the Bucks. You may read it in the Sentinel if you get it. You don't really know about them. It's much like hearing Ted Thompson. He's been missing since summer camp. You may find his body up there in executive, I don't know. But at any rate, we in Waupaca County try to do something every January after a long year of county business and budgeting and you know what. We all get a little uptight and let's relax a little bit at our January meeting. So what we've done in Waupaca County, and just for this year, and when we're lucky because the third base coach of the Kansas City Royals, championship Kansas City Royals, lives in my hometown. He's a good friend of mine, Mike Jorsley in Clintonville. So the last 2 years we had Mike come over in January to speak at the meeting, and he must have been there for a half hour or 45 minutes, talking about the Royals' journey to the World Championship. So very interesting, and he's such a great speaker, and he's such a really a great community man. And I had printed a number of colored photos of him holding the championship trophy after the game, and I had him laid on the agenda so he could stick around and visit with the supervisors, the staff was there. We had other government officials from our municipalities there. We had one supervisor's grandson skip school to be there, and it was just a great time. And it really kind of brings our supervisors and the staff together for that. And we had him there last year too when he finished in second place. And in fact, the other night he was telling me he had to go to Manitowoc to be in a radio show, and then he had to do this and had to do that. And he says, you know, I hope we don't win that thing next year. I'm busy all the time. I said, if you don't, we're getting you back at the county. Ask us why the hell what happened to you. He said, I love coming to Waupaca County. But and then about 4 years ago, I had Coach Jack Bennett of UW Stevens Point basketball team, I think, who won 2 straight national championships in that division. And of course, Jack is an elegant speaker, and he gave a fiery halftime coach speak to us, and I think we supervisors are ready to play ball. But it's stuff like this. Some of you may want to do this to get your mind off of county business a little bit after you know, a tough year. So thanks for the opportunity, and I really mirror what Lee said, because he and I are sports addicts, as you know, and we do a lot of talking about sports. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah, do we have, over here, John?
Just quickly, Brown County is going to be looking at investing in its old arena. In the infrastructure, it's going to be roughly about $100 million, and we certainly hope that the state and all the counties will be supportive of us in that endeavor, seeing that we're in a very giving mode today. So needless to say, have a good day.
So there'll be a hat being passed here shortly, Troy's hat, donate to the Brown County Arena. I just want to remind everyone, and we will stay here as long as people have issues or questions, but I do want to remind everyone in about 40 minutes or so, we're going to have our reception begin, but we can, if we want to, we'll bring the reception in here and keep answering questions if you like. So, yes. Over here? Yeah. John?
Governor Walker attended or brought to Winnie County a listening session yesterday. And one of the main things that he wanted to do was what Supervisor Decker was talking about, was job creation, and that was one of his big pushes. He had a sheet of paper, 2 sheets, that they wrote approximately 200 different things on, like a group of people of this many, there was, I think 100 and some people there. But everybody had a little different version of what they wanted to see done. But one of his main things, he would like to do some more for job creation.
And Governor Walker will be here tomorrow to talk with us directly. I suspect that job creation will be part of his message to us. Other issues? Questions?
Yeah. I'd just like to address perhaps a bigger issue that hasn't been talked about, but thinking about as citizens, what do we do? If you look at our healthcare system and realize that basically it's not as comprehensive as we'd like it to be, in particular in the area of mental health. We're now providing mental health services through school board dollars to our students in school. We're now providing mental health services to the individuals that we come in contact with on a county level, usually juvenile, usually jails. But if we were to honestly think about it as a society, we should be thinking about whether or not mental health is truly what is expected of a healthcare system, the providing of mental health services. Recently I visited Prairie Ridge School, 2 3-year-old school. 20% of the children in our schools have behavioral and mental health issues. That's where this should begin. That's where workforce development should begin. We need to develop the type of healthcare system that doesn't abandon populations because they're not particularly profitable and they're difficult to deal with. So if we really want to look at the issue of those that in our society that we really don't know what to do with because they're not getting proper services, then we ought to be thinking about how we relate to the individuals that we buy health care from. And we ought to be demanding that mental health really gets the parity that it deserves.
Point well made, Colleen. Very well made. Other issues? Anyone who wishes to share? Anyone at all? Okay, then I have a couple of announcements here. First off, and Cheryl, if you could bring we're going to do some giveaways here and some drawings. We have, again, this could not be possible without the help of our sponsors. And some of you have asked me what happened to Josh Bindle, one of our members of the staff. Josh is no longer with us. Not on the planet, but just with the association. He went to head up, and he is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of National Cooperative RX, Wisconsin RX, a pharmacy benefits management company. I tell him he's a big drug dealer now, but he is not. He is, and I raise that because National Cooperative RX is a major sponsor of this event, so he is still with us in spirit. Also, for those of you that know Josh, and I think most everyone does, while we will miss him, you won't miss him for long after you meet Michael Lamont. And Michael, could you kind of wave your hand there? This is the new Chief Operating Officer of the Group Health Trust. Feel free to chat with Michael. He is incredibly capable and is taking over for Josh. Also, American Transmission Company is a great sponsor of ours, the entity that makes sure that you get power to where it needs to be utilized. And Premier Solutions Group, our former colleague from Racine County, Mr. McReynolds, heads up that company, and we do some work with Mac on a whole host of issues. Very quickly, 5 to 7 tonight is a reception just down the hallway. 7:30 tomorrow morning, there will be a hot breakfast. You won't want to miss that. And at 8:30, we will begin. And you don't want to be late for the 8:30 beginning, because Charles Franklin, the world-renowned, certainly nationally renowned pollster, is going to tell us who is going to win all the elections. So he'll be here at 8:30. And with that, let's go through a couple of drawings here. So we have, we have a $50 Quick Trip gift card. We have 2 of them. So Cheryl draw a couple of names here. Okay, first one, and you have to be present to win. So I want you to let me know who you are, because if you don't let me know, we're going on to the next person. So the first $50 Quick Trip gift card is going to, from Rock County, Nick Osborne. Nick, you here? Oh, come on. Really? No Nick Osborne. Going once, twice. All right. Sorry, Nick. All right. So for the first $50 Quick Trip gift card, from Forest County, Paul Milan. Paul? All right, here you go. All right, get a hold of that. All right, secondly, from Sheboygan County, Tom Wagner. Tom? Oh, okay, all right. That just shows you don't let a little snow get in your way. All right. All right, and how about Door County, Ken Fisher? Holy cow. All right. Here we go. Douglas County, Alan Jakes. Douglas. Holy cow. All right. How about we just auction it off? How about that? Okay. All right. Oconto County, Paul Bednarik. Do we have the right list here, Cheryl? I mean, is it? Okay. All right. All right, how about Eau Claire County, Greg Moore? All right, there we go. Okay. And are we keeping track of who the winners are here? We got someone writing this down? Okay. All right, then we have from the 2Gs. This is our partners here in the Delta Dental arena. All right, $50 gift certificate, Barron County, Jeff French. Okay. All right. Do we have anybody left here? If you're here, raise your hand. How about that? All right. From Kewaunee County, Scott Felt. All right. Cheryl, mix those up a bit. All right. Okay. How about our good friend from Waukesha County, Sarah Spaeth. Sarah? All right, I know this guy's from Oneida County. Dave Hintz. There he is. Yeah, Dave. There you go. Okay. All right. The second 2G's $50 gift card. Who knew this would be so difficult? All right. From the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, Sheldon Johnson. Sheldon, are you here? All right, Sheldon. All right. Okay. All right. I've always had trouble pronouncing this. It is the OGIO backpack. Was it OGIO? Is that a brand name? OGIO. The brand name. We have 2 backpacks and then 1 laptop tote bag. So a backpack. All right. Milwaukee County, Willie Johnson Jr. There he is. Where is he? All right. Okay. Willie did not win. All right. Okay, from Washington County, Joshua Scheneman. All right. From Waukesha County, Larry Nelson. Larry. All right, there he is. Okay. That was the first backpack. Is that right? First one? Okay. All right, the second OGO backpack, Wapaka County, Fred Zaug. Fred? Fred? No? All right. Second backpack, Eau Claire County, Colleen Bates. I know she's here. All right. Okay, the laptop tote bag, Green Lake County, Jack Myers. Jack? Jack left. Okay, tote bag, laptop bag, OGO, Oneida County, Carol Peterson. Carol, there we go. Okay, we're getting closer here. We just got 20 more gifts. Okay. All right, from University of Wisconsin Extension Local Government Center, we have 2 registrations for the county officials workshop. They are $75 values, and the first one is going to Sauk County Board Chair Marty Krieger. Marty, are you here? All right, I want everyone to feel free to find these people during the reception and tell them what they did not win. All right? Okay. County officials workshop. La Crosse County. Mike Giese. Mike. Okay, right here. Here we go. There we go. Going to the county officials workshop. You'll love it. That's very good. We have one more county officials workshop, and it is next county officials workshop is going to Green Lake County, Sarah Gunther. Sarah, very good. All right. See, you tell everyone how you're going to solve all the problems, and now you're going to the workshop to tell them again. Perfect. Okay. All right, we have 3 more items. Next one is a WCA leather portfolio. This is really a beautiful item. Milwaukee County Executive's Office, Eric Peterson. Eric here? There he is. All right. You know, those who are staff, they are, and they're here to receive their winning, are so happy that this is on Wisconsin Eye. Yes, I was there, Mr. Executive. I won something. Okay. A 2016 WCA conference registration valued at $175. Remember, this year's conference is in Milwaukee County. Really excited. It's going to be a great conference. Let's see. Wapaka County, Donna Gabbert. Donna? Okay. You're going to the conference. And you have to keep an eye on Dick and Jack when you go. Okay. And we have one more conference registration. And this, I think, is this the last item, I think? Yeah, I think so. Okay. One more conference registration, and that is from Outagamie County, Mark Wadium. Mark? Mark? Okay, staff person, you just went to the restroom, sorry. Okay. Not here, okay, we know that. All right, going to the conference is Outagamie County Barney Lemansky. Barney? He's not going to the conference, okay. All right, how about Taylor County's Lester Lewis? Are you going to the conference? Yes, you are. Here we go. All right. All right, that's what we have for giveaways. Remember, reception 4 to 6, just down the hallway. Tomorrow, 7:30 breakfast, 8:30 session. Thank you very much. We'll see you in just a couple of minutes. 5 to 7.